Good everything. We are here, episode 81. Dr. Gray Carr, in class with Carr. Hi. Good
Hi.
morning. Good morning.
181.
181 episodes
That's
unbroken.
something really. I saw the former dean of Howard University's School of Communications, the legendary scholar and academic administrator, educator Jeanette Dates, yesterday at a funeral. Interestingly enough, she and her colleague Clyde Barlow many years ago edited a big book called Split Image on African Americans in Media. That's her best known work, but it does television, film, everything. It was a Bible for us back in the 90s. But at any rate, I saw her and I was like, "How you doing, Dean?" Hadn't seen her in a while. She'd been retired for a while. She said, "Oh, Dr. Carr, so good to see you. I don't ever miss you. I see you always on the internet and I watch your class." And I said, "What?" So Professor Hunter, just another.
That's crazy. No, I mean, this thing is global. This thing, when I say this thing, this quest for knowledge, I didn't realize, how much people wanted to be in community, because it's more than just sitting, and listening to somebody talk about history.
There are 1,000 of those things.
It's that you have created this circle around the tree for multi-generations to contemplate our place in this world, right? Through the lens of Africana studies and Africana ways of knowing. And that's for all people, because we're all from that one continent. And you have completely changed the way I see the world. And I'm just grateful that we get to be here on Saturdays and beyond now in Nubia, with a K and with an N.
How about that?
Yes.
The K and the N are together. Yes. As it was supposed to be.
And the K ain't so silent. Y'all out there making noise. So
right. No, thank you. We're doing this together. We're all doing this work together, and it's a beautiful thing as it continues to just flourish. Here at the beginning of the traditional U.S. school year, which we disrupted that rhythm. We're together all year round. It just so happens that in August we go back into some of these formal spaces.
And even how we go to school is around an enslavement calendar, right? It's around planting season and harvest season, and the school day, like all of it, right? Like we need to reimagine all, like, what does it mean to learn? And what are we learning for, right? As we talk about today, the anniversary of the March on Washington, I was thinking deep thought this morning about the validity of such a moment that we can celebrate. But as I look at the job, because it was a march for jobs, as I look at the disparity in pay, as I look at the lack of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, as I interviewed Loida Lewis, the wife of Reginald Lewis, the first person to own, $1 billion company. Reginald Lewis, there's most of our billionaires are still in entertainment. When I think about industries, I think about Walmart, that family that owns, all six of them still in the top 20 wealthiest people, because one man built something that's still here that his family, his children's children are eating off of. I think about the trucking industry run by the Sikhs who just came to this country, right? So you have major trucking industries run by folk, and they're warriors, they're badass, but I'm like, what's our industry? Hair care and nails in our community. Not us, even though we're the biggest consumers of it.
Right.
And so when I think about marching for jobs, all I think about are people begging for opportunities and humanities that we ourselves have not created.
That's or have created and have been under systematic attack. In other words,
No, I'm not blaming us. I'm not saying there's something deficient. I'm saying that we have to reimagine what it looks like.
Right. That's the That's the key.
So let me back up, because it's easy to, why are we doing this? Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this.
We know that.
Yeah. We know there's a, wider conspiracy, and we also know why. But if we're not conscious, right,
that's the key.
It's like, oh, why?
That's the key.
How come every 7-Eleven in my community, what? I'm buying donuts from what now? I'm just like, and my kids can't get a job here? Come on now. And there's no disparagement of anybody coming here or opportunities that they have. I'm just saying we must start to reimagine, because we built all of it, all of the infrastructure here.
Absolutely. I mean, how do we? I think what we're doing and what so many other people are doing very similarly, although we like to think that what we're doing is distinct in the sense that we are coming from a very declarative Black space and not a Black space, an Africana space. We're not trapped by race in the way. In fact, I was having that conversation with undergrads in my Education in Black America class this week, but what we're all doing in terms of trying to help ourselves understand and regain that momentum of memory, it's very much diminishing returns in some ways. I mean, I went yesterday, like I said, spent most of the day in Baltimore. I came back and sat down, said I just needed to reset, and I hadn't yet seen Oppenheimer, so I went to see Oppenheimer. Now I got to go to Barbie so that I can compare the two films. But bump, that's a joke. Barbie is
like what?
Exactly. I mean, one's a movie, one's a film. But no, I don't know what Barbie is other than the cash cow. But and Oppenheimer I mean, it has its moments of pretension. It's 3+ hours of dialogue. For those of you who hadn't seen it yet, and and just sitting there listening to this back and forth. Cillian Murphy as it plays the one who was from Peaky Blinders.
Yes.
Yeah, he plays Oppenheimer. But it's a cast where it's almost like every white actor in Hollywood who wants to be affiliated with gravitas in popular film tried to get a role. Matt Damon was in there. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was in there. It's like Harry Truman. Was it Gary Sinise? I forget what. Anyway, my point is this. Completely dialogue. There were some graphic moments, obviously. We want to see the bomb exploding and how they're working on the technology. But it was basically 3.5 hours of talking, which means you can't compare it to Barbie. But they was talking to Barbie too, I guess. But my point is that listening to them, watching the Oppenheimer character at Princeton at the Center for Advanced Study, Robert Downey Jr. tries to recruit the character into to direct the center, and he looks out of his window where his ostensible office is going to be, and he sees Albert Einstein out there throwing rocks in the pool. And the Downey character says, "Let me go introduce you." He says, "I know him." Then he went out there to speak to Einstein, and Robert Downey from a distance sees the two of them approach each other, and then you just see Einstein walk past him and pass down. He said, "What did you say to him?" "Nothing." Einstein's against the bomb. Of course, he had written to the White House like, "Look, the Russians gonna have this bomb. It's gonna be a problem." But once you develop that technology, the whole movie, by the way, it can't be a spoiler alert. If you ever read the book American Prometheus, the big book on Oppenheimer. But I put it this way: the narrative spine of the book isn't about building the bomb. The narrative spine of the movie and the book, but the narrative spine of the film Oppenheimer is about Oppenheimer being persecuted by the American government because he has realized that I just let loose death on all of us, and they got him. He's at a hearing from the beginning to the end of the film where they're quizzing him on communism, quizzing him on his friends. I know you're a Jew, but you got this Jew out of night. One of them cats that came from England working this bomb was a spy. Now the Russians, they're obsessed with Russia, not Nazi Germany. And so he meets with Harry Truman. Oppenheimer's in the White House, and he's like, "I have blood on my hands." And then Truman's whole face changed. He said, "This ain't about you. You didn't drop the bomb. I dropped the bomb." And then you just see, it's like, you just see all. I encourage y'all, if you can stand listening to people talk for 3.5 hours, but then again, I'm talking about not Barbie talk, but like talk, like real. The Egyptians have a word, tef. It means rough translation. It means that you are talking, but there are no words. There's no speech. Like the Europeans, you translate as idle chatter. So in other words, you've said things, but you've said nothing. There's no speech involved. So
or talking loud and saying nothing,
as James Brown would say.
Yeah.
No question. So anyway, it made me think about it because here we are back in the school cycle. Here we are doing what we're trying to do. And the question that you really raised with your initial observations is, how do we penetrate so that people can see the thing in front of them and be able to tell what's important and what's not, and then act on understanding what's important and what's not.
Is it a way? Because I think what you do, and me to a lesser degree on the radio, is simple. No, I mean, I'm not comparing.
Right.
I don't have comparing only by this. The scholarship that you have, that takes 45, 50 years of constant reading that you build on, right? Because there's a compound effect, just like with your money, right? You save a penny every day, double it. You know, you've done that with knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So everyone trying to catch, we're not going to catch up. All we can do is allow you to disseminate, like the baby, you know, the baby birds that we are, information, right? So chew it up. I can do it in some areas. There are other people that can do it in other areas. And we must go to those people who have put in 40, 50 years of scholarship and allow them to at least awaken parts of our brain that has been, you know, asleep, addled, atrophying, you know, and start to do that. Because you were talking all year about the ban on books, the actual ban on books, which is a lack of reading. 60% of adults have never read a book. 60% have never read a book cover to cover. They haven't read a novel, which is a whole other awakening of a brain, you know. And I just think about, no, and again, I'm not wagging a finger. I'm just asking a question. How do we expect to build systems if we're not willing to do the discipline of learning something from beginning to end? I had a builder on my show today. Thursday, last time I was on. She's a woman, been in construction. She owns a construction company. So I had her on because I'm, you know, renovating, and I had her on for selfish reasons. But it turned into a fascinating conversation about, you know, why aren't we controlling it? When Maynard Jackson was like, okay, the government contract set aside for Black people, and then there were very few qualified folk. And you could argue about access, but then you could also say, you're master builders. Why aren't y'all 10 of you coming together, an architect here, and forming a company? There's more than enough work out there.
That's right.
And when it's time, we need to be ready. But she said she went back to law school because there were so many changing regulations and permits and things. She went back to school to get a law degree so that she can help her company expand. And I was like, how many people, whether you're opening a restaurant, are you going to, you know, culinary school, learning different desserts, just to even bring one spice into your situation to make it different or better, to expand on Big Mama's recipe? You know, are you going to business school to make sure your business is aligned? Because it is always a business, whether we're talking about show business or, you know, actual brick and mortar.
Yes.
You know, so I'm also, you know, asking that question, like, you know, what are we reading? You know, and how are we reading? And even, you know, I'm listening to books, but there's nothing that beats like you opening that paper.
No question.
Come on.
No question.
But how do we get people to even want to do that? And it's frustrating if you haven't been doing it, because it's like you like, I'm compared to working out, because I was getting back in the gym, and you want to do everything in the gym. And I just was talking to a friend of mine. He pulled a stomach muscle because, you know, he's back in the gym. Kevin Hart was trying to race somebody. He pulled a stomach muscle. Like, you know, it's like you got to work out. You know, you got to stretch. My contractor hurt himself because he's playing soccer with his kids, and I'm like, you ain't been out there. Like, you got to build up to being out there to make it consistent, and then you got to be gentle with yourself till you get there. But I'm asking people, there's a young man teaching himself to read, and it's really, you know, powerful and encouraging watching him struggle through, you know, simple nursery rhymes and things. But it's also empowering, because once he gets over that hurdle, there's a whole world of things that will open up to him. But that takes time and discipline. And are we willing to do that to get to the next place individually and then collectively?
Well,
so I was just thinking about that.
No, I mean, that's important for us to continue. Time, it takes focus, as you say, discipline, and it takes support. I mean, there's an op-ed this morning in the New York Times. Ben Wodowski, visiting scholar at University of Virginia, he's got a book coming out soon, and the headline is, "Let's stop pretending college degrees don't matter." You're teaching yourself how to read. You obviously have some support. It could be living support, other people physically helping you. It could be digital support, technological support, some type of program or video, you know, everything that's at a fingertip away on your phone or iPad or computer, or however you're accessing technology or using technology to access information and instruction. But ultimately, if you're doing that by yourself, or with minimal support, it becomes incredibly difficult. And I think the exercise metaphor is striking, because people want to exercise, want to work out, want to get back in shape, and they do it individually. It becomes very difficult because you are in your own head. As my friend Aisha Imani, the founder of Sankofa Freedom Academy, and our collective work to create a K-12 freedom school in Philadelphia, often said and says, as a master teacher that she is, sometimes she would get young people together, and I observed her doing this so much that I continue. I started to practice myself. So, students are talking, everybody's excited, so everybody, let's just be quiet, let's just center. And invariably, somebody makes some noise. So what's wrong? Everybody all right? And you hear a little titter of laughter, maybe, or a little more mumble. Say, Aisha always say, the most difficult thing in the world for human beings in the society we live in now is to be quiet. Why? Because when you're quiet, you're with yourself. And when you're with yourself, you're with everything that is in your head. And so we would say you're also with your ancestors. You're with your imagination. You're with your fears, your dreams, your anxieties, your hopes, your desires. And that can be quite torturous for people who have been socialized not to be quiet. That's why we had our conversation around the power of the pause. It's not really a pause in a way, in terms of life, to borrow from Robert Farris Thompson, the so-called African art historian. He says, wherever you go in Africana societies, you will see in dance, in art, in cultural meaning making, a number of consistent themes or consistent practices. One of them, he identifies 10. We've talked about this before. When we did the Introduction to Africana States class, we started talking about cultural meaning making and ways of knowing. But he talks about this simultaneous suspension and preservation of the beat. So, every time we come into the building, everybody hand go up, 2, 3, and they stay there, and they stay there. No, when you up, down, you're suspending the beat, but you're preserving the beat. Well, when you are quiet, you aren't interrupting, going around, moving back and forth. No, what you're doing is you're suspending all that noise and you're preserving that rhythm at the same time. But the suspension of that noise allows other hearing, other listening, deep listening, what the ancient Egyptians would have called medu, which is to hear, to truly hear. In fact, in Taotep, there's a phrase that says, when listening enters the hearer becomes as a master. In other words, you've mastered the art of internalizing, of listening. And when you're quiet, you have to do that. And it's difficult sometimes to be quiet by yourself. Sometimes you have to work together. And so literacy is something that we see increasingly difficult. When Africans came out of enslavement, fought our way out of enslavement here in the United States, those of us who were in the room from the U.S., learning to read was a collective practice. If you didn't know how to read, you had to literally find another human being to help you. And often that human being was of African descent before the end of enslavement, and certainly after the end of enslavement as the schools began to rise. And I'm only raising all that as a prelude to get into the conversation today. Again, we're verging on the 28th of August, Monday. That will be the 60th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington. Today, they are projecting anywhere from 50 to 70,000 people will descend upon the National Mall here in the United States to quote unquote commemorate the March on Washington. There are a number of people. I think the event is being organized by Martin Luther King III's organization, as well as the Drum Major Institute is the name of it, and the National Action Network. That's Reverend Sharpton and others. And regardless of what you think of folks' politics, and including critique of their politics or celebration or support of their politics, it's very interesting to see the roster of speakers. Martin Luther King's only granddaughter, will be speaking. Andrew Young, Ambassador, Mayor, Congressman Young will be speaking, of course, 91 years old. One of the lieutenants of Martin King. Clarence Jones, Dr. King's lawyer. I don't know if he'll be speaking, but he's been invited. He'll be in attendance. At least that's what all the reports are saying. And you see the co-chairs of this 60 60th anniversary, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice and Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which of course gave us Kristen Clark, the Deputy Attorney General, Black America's Attorney General. If I had to pick one, and you don't have to pick one, certainly with people like Fonnie Willis and Alvin Bragg. And shout out to Jim Jordan, the pride of the Ohio 4th Congressional District, who continues as he continues to muck his way through a corn pone clan adjacent public life. Wants to now jump on Fonnie Willis, and I'm sure that would be a dance that both his little corn pone feet would come off. I mean, it's not the wrestling Met, Jim. Not that you spent much time paying attention to anything going on in wrestling at Ohio State, but shout out to Jim Jordan and all of his white nationalist adjacent friends who are just determined to hide behind the idea that there's something called the rule of law that isn't bent to cultural will. But back to the point. So there are a lot of other people. Legal Defense Fund is a co-chair, NAACP, of course, the Urban League, National Council of Negro Women, National Coalition of Black Voter Participation, the Anti-Defamation League, and Unidos US. All these are co-chairs. And then there's a whole list in this March on Washington. They're saying it's not a commemoration, it's not a celebration, it's a continuation. And I would agree, it is a continuation of a long struggle. But between 1963 and 2023, there have been a lot of struggles in between and more that precede them. But then when you look at the community partners, it's just a laundry list. Everybody from the Alphas and the Children's Defense Fund to Advocates for Youth, Demand Justice, from the Deltas to Emily's List, from DC Vote to Jewish Democratic Council of America. I mean, it's everybody, National Black Justice Coalition. Everybody's listed up. They had a beautiful website. They got labor union partners. They got the Black Christian community, the AME Church, AME Zion Church, Kojic, Church of God in Christ, the National Baptist Convention. I mean, you see. To what avail? To what avail? And I'm saying that in the context of thinking about today's continuation. And we have to think about it in the context of the world we live in right now. And again, what Professor Hunter said at the beginning, I think is very apt for us to think about. What is important and what's not important? And how do we develop the capacity to tell? A great deal of that comes with study. A great deal of that comes with time. And no, nobody's going to, quote unquote, catch up to anybody else who has been doing a thing for perhaps their entire life. But the point isn't to catch up. The point is to do collective work. It's to work together. It's to do what Ayikwe Arma, Baba Ayikwe, sitting now in Popengine, Senegal, has been talking and writing about now for decades, including his last few books, including Wat and Shemsu, The Way of Companions, where he says, we all develop our skills and we put them together. That's a theme in Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer, New York Jew with roots, of course, in Europe, went to school in Europe. You see him in England and you see him in Germany, pre-war Germany, with Jewish scientists and scholars who are German, who are going to get run out of Nazi Germany or exterminated. And you see Oppenheimer grappling with this, even as he is contributing to technology ostensibly to end a war that is a war with Germany, but then the Germans surrender, but the feds want them to keep going. And of course, they drop 2 bombs on Japan, which he finds indefensible, except he contributed to technology. But that's not really the point. The point I want to make is that, it's dramatized in the film and, of course, explained in great detail in American Prometheus, the book that Byrd, I think is the mission. There's a long arc. We mentioned this in class about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer. The book American Prometheus. But what you read and what you see in the film dramatized is this moment when the federal government, represented by the Matt Damon character, colonel in the military, trying to get Oppenheimer to lead and assemble this team after they've done their due diligence on him, knowing that his brother is in the Communist Party, his brother's girlfriend, that he himself, got this married woman pregnant after driving this other lady insane who he was kicking it with, who he met at the Communist Party meeting. They got everything on Oppenheimer, but they still want him to lead what becomes known as the Manhattan Project, because he's quite simply the best scientist, particularly when he's talking about quantum work in the United States. And so they hold aside all that stuff they don't like until they need to pull out their back pocket and screw him when the bomb has been developed. And as they say, we'll take it from here. But I'm raising all that to say that he can't build a bomb by himself. So he takes up residence. He's first at Cal Berkeley, then you see him come across to the East Coast, and you see him in conversation there, and with these scientists that he knows, and with students, beginning with one student in his class, and then you see them come as they realize he's got another way of thinking about physics. He's got another way of thinking about quantum theory. And so I'm saying out to say that they at the moment that is dramatized in the narrative, the feds, represented by the army guys, like, look, what is it going to take for you to build this bomb to beat Germany and Russia from having the bomb? He said, I need my people and I need a place, isolation. Where we going to find an isolated place? Let's go to Los Alamos. Now, what's glossed over in the film, and many critics have noted this, is the indigenous people who lived there, who were there before, who they displaced. The only time you see them even nominally alluded to is near the end, when they ask him after the bomb has been built and dropped, and now they're going to move to the H-bomb or something. And like, what? And Truman asked him, what should we do with Los Alamos? Oppenheimer says, give it back to the Indians. At which point, Truman's face changes again, like, what the fuck? And you hear him as he throws Oppenheimer out his office, out the Oval Office, the White House. Don't let that, I forget what he said, in here again. In other words, thanks, but no thanks. But that's even not the point. I'm still in the footnotes. Let me get to the main theme. The theme is collective work. Who are Oppenheimer's companions? Oppenheimer's companions are the people, the other brilliant scientists, former students, proteges, who don't know what he knows. He calls Einstein to check some figures because, he has now been presented by one of the European scientists with the dilemma that if you create this fusion fission reaction, you could set fire to the atmosphere and the whole globe burn. He says, are you sure? He said, you can run that math again, but I'm telling you, it's a small chance. He said, well, you know what? Let me check with Einstein. So he calls Einstein, who, doesn't want to blow up nothing, but Einstein is advanced this thing. And he said, can you check the math? And Einstein was like, no, like you, we share one thing in common, not ideology. Now, we do share one thing in common. We both have a disdain for math. Then he starts laughing. He said, go get the math guy. I'm not the math guy. The point is this. Einstein tells Oppenheimer, neither one of us are the math guy. You don't do what they did without a team. Our people seem to think that if you get 15 million followers on the gram or, TikTok, whatever, you somehow created an influencer. Is it influence if the people don't do what you say? And is it influence if the people do what you say, but it's absolutely nothing? In other words, let's make a video. You're moving around. Yeah. Can you just be still? Go viral with a thinking video. Guess what? Somebody gonna do that, and it won't matter. Now but if people practice the art of being still, a great number of the answers to our daily challenges are in our heads, in our memory. But collective work is what we're talking about, and that's what we're talking about with the March on Washington. The March on Washington is an event that is constantly drummed into the minds of people. They might be able to, if you say March on Washington, they'll say, yeah. When was it? I don't know. Well, who was there? Dr. King. Who else? Was John Kennedy? I don't know. Who's John Kennedy? John Kennedy, right? Is Kennedy? Is it Nixon? Oh, man, I forgot. Was it Reagan? No, then the thing just starts falling apart because it's a phrase. But it is a phrase that signals an event that is part of a longer arc of movement that is itself a part of a long arc of collective work. And here in narrative, here in Nubia, here and in class, what we've been doing now for 3+ years is just evoking moments that provide what Holly Greenberg calls points of entry, that we can then use to study and identify those rhythms. And then we can, as we begin to know what's important and what's not, and how to tell the difference, we can then use these ritual moments as points of entry to renew ourselves. And it can truly be not a commemoration, but a continuation. But these are all narratives. So a couple of things, and then we'll get into that. As I said, today's article, Let's Stop Pretending College Degrees Don't Matter, gets to the heart of what we're doing here. Not what we're trying to do. We do it. to the degree that it's effective in that, we can continue to see that. Everybody, again, the next wave of folk like you, Prof, and so many others who went back to school this week, joining those of us who've been in school now 2 weeks, 3 weeks, near the beginning of August. The full momentum here in the United States of the school year is now being brought. There are a couple more weeks to go. Next week, of course, for us to September, you see another wave of folk come. And then we're in the rhythm. The Klan adjacents, the hillbilly horde, the white nationalists, they're fighting hard. Curriculum wars all over the country. The rather sluggish-minded governor of Arkansas trying to stop the advanced placement African-American studies course in Arkansas failed, of course. There in Oklahoma, onward Christian soldier, white nationalist, Secretary of Education, young boy, 38 years old, forcing the resignation of the superintendent of Tulsa. This is the same white nationalist Secretary of Education in Oklahoma who wanted the 10 Commandments put in the classrooms, who's trying to ban CRT. Looks almost like perfectly cast for the role, if you ever see a picture of him. And I try very hard not to judge people by how they look, because obviously, as Dr. King said, you don't want to judge people by how they look. And so I won't judge this man by how he looked, but how he acts. Speaking at Moms for Liberty, saying that, you know, he and these other secretaries of education at the state level will now take it from the mothers and fathers and community people and billionaires and everybody else trying to stave up the white nationalism. Of course, in Florida, the war continues, a war that has been joined by those of African descent and others who are determined to teach what is correct in the classroom. So anyway, back to school, we're in that rhythm. And last week in my Education in Black America class, one of the reasons I love HBCUs is because if you have a class full of students, it's almost hard not to have someone in that class who has some direct knowledge and or relationship with something you're talking about in the African world. And so you all remember last week I mentioned the panel on affirmative action that was held in Martha's Vineyard, sponsored by the Harvard Hutchins Center and PBS, I think it was, a week ago this past Thursday. Thursday was the 24th, so it was what was it, 14, what is that, 17th of August, in Martha's Vineyard. And before I showed this clip that I showed to the students, before I showed a clip to them so we could talk about it, I said, well, this being Howard, this being an HBCU, there's 100 people in here. I assume somebody in here has some direct knowledge of where this place is. So I named the little place they had at this church. 4 hands went up. I said, tell us. I've been in Martha's Vineyard. I know people in Martha's Vineyard. I know where that place is. It's virtually all white. There's nobody black over there. It's okay. This is great. So they're filling in gaps. Now, you know, I had done research, so I know, but I wanted to hear directly. And of course, anytime you get that many students together, this is the value of black institutions. We saw it in Kemet. We see it here in Nubia. Anytime you get a bunch of people together, somebody knows something about it. In fact, let me see if I can take 15 seconds here and pull up the video, and I'm going to test that theory right now. And what I love, and believe me, all this comes together. Let me see. Affirmative action, Hutchins conversation, Gary 2, 1, and I'm here again. Here we are. It was hosted at, who knows where the old Whaling Church is, WHALING Church in Edgartown, Massachusetts. I had 4 students who knew exactly where that was. So this being a much larger classroom, thousands of people globally, I'm sure there are many more people just by virtue of the fact that you expanded that by only 100 students in that class. So let's go, what, 100 or 1,000 times that many, and we'll see. But at any rate, this is where the conversation on affirmative action was being held. And it was fascinating because, as I said last week, I won't go back over this. I'm just going to mention it here in the context of this article in today's New York Times, and then coming again, this question of collective work, which is at the spine of this commemoration, this continuation of the 1963 March on Washington. At this conversation, the whole thing was about quote unquote elite institutions. By elite, I mean elite white institutions. By elite white institutions, I mean the Ivy League and Ivy adjacents. And so the whole hand-wringing and dilemma was about the non-white presence, chiefly the black presence at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of California, Berkeley, these kind of places. And it was a thoroughly, pause, It was a revealing conversation. I won't say interesting. Some interesting comments were made. Of all people, John McWhorter made the comment, which I mentioned last week, that in the wake of the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, and then Brown 2 in 1955, the all deliberate speed phase, execution phase, which remains unimagined, McWhorter said he called it unfortunate accident and unintentional. I, of course, absolutely don't believe any of that, because I believe that what he expressed was a sentiment that people had before Brown and continue to this day, albeit perhaps worse, in worse fashion, since Jim and Jane Crow have been removed. American apartheid in terms of legal apartheid in terms of education. You know, now it's integrated, meaning what? Give us your ball players and your 4.0s. The rest of you Negroes can go to hell or wherever else y'all go when y'all don't play basketball, sing, dance, or score off the charts. But the point is this: integration. That's what we mean by that, integration. McWhorter said, in the wake of Brown, unfortunately, people began to think that if a classroom is all Black children with a Black teacher, it's an inferior education. And I thought to myself, before Brown? Yeah, before Brown, John. Professor McWhorter, before Brown, because if you look at that damn doll test that Kimmy and Kenneth and Mamie Clark did, you got these Black children picking this white doll, and then they think the solution to it in part is to sit them next to the person the doll looks like. And you know, these people, this is a Negro that's out of his mind, to quote Malcolm X. So before Brown, this goes into the social science that went into the arguments of Brown, the harm of segregation, You've completely misread what the problem is, which is Zora Hurston's point, which is why John McWhorter said Zora Hurston didn't agree and she was attacked for it. Another thing he said was, you know, white people didn't want to do Brown. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't want to do Brown. And he says, what you then have is this decimation, and this comes up again later in the conversation, this decimation of these Black structures. That doesn't mean the Black structures were perfect. They were not well resourced. You know, they didn't have the books, they didn't have often the physical plant, but they did have was the will and the collective work. And that is something that has not disappeared, but has been very much damaged post-Brown. You know, 100,000 Black teachers lose their jobs, as our sister Leslie Fenwick mentions in her book, Jim Crow's Pink Slip. If you haven't gotten it, I encourage you to get it. You see what happened to the teachers, post-Brown Black teachers. But anyway, I'm gonna get too far off into that. The point I want to make is that near the end of the symposium, let me see who did. I was in Egerton in July, but not as specific. See, as I'm talking about, I'm just scrolling through the Nubia chat. I know later in the YouTube chat, it's going to be a whole lot more dialogue. Very good. Thank you. They opened it up for question and answer very briefly. One of the first people to speak was Walter Massey. Dr. Massey was provost of the University of California, Berkeley when they ended affirmative action. He was the president of Morehouse College. He was on the board of the community colleges of Chicago. And he was talking about how there are a lot more institutions. In fact, most of the institutions in this country are not Ivy League schools. And in fact, remember last month, I think it was early last month, I read to everybody a piece from an op-ed that was in the Financial Times by Edward Luce. It was entitled "The Moral Bankruptcy of Ivy League America." And I keep that quote close now because he said that of the 31 million Americans aged between 18 and 24, just about 68,000 are Ivy League schools undergraduates, about a fifth of 1%. Of these, a varying ratio are non-white because they're beneficial from affirmative action. Many are from privileged Black or Hispanic backgrounds as opposed to Chicago's South Side or wastelands of Detroit. This is the basis on which Ivy League claims to be deliverer of social change. It's top-down social change. Skip Gates said at the beginning of the symposium, he said, we, like Du Bois, I believe we influence things from the top down. I said, don't put that on Du Bois. Don't do that, Professor Gates. Or do it, by all means do it, but don't expect not to get pushback on that. As Du Bois said in Whither, Now, and Why, 1960, the speech he gave at Johnson C. Smith to the social science educators. He and his wife both spoke that day. He said, this is what's going to happen. The laws are going to change, and then you're going to see a deterioration of education. You're going to see Black children not want to go to school. which is the point John McWhorter made when he said white people didn't want to do Brown. And then when they did Brown, black students started going in these spaces. And what they then began to develop was a real disdain for and contempt for school, which persists to this day. They said, these people don't want us here. We don't want to be here. That isn't the only reason we have this challenge. But when you read W.E.B. Du Bois's speech, 1960, spring 1960, Whither, Now, and Why, delivered at Johnson C. Smith University, what he says is these laws are going to change and you're going to have to face the real issue. The issue is race and culture. And you're going to see black children begin to not want to go to school. Now, what had already started was the wholesale firing and destruction of the pipeline that created black teachers by 1960 even, certainly accelerating after 1965 and that decade of busing and black teachers just being decimated and people not going into profession. I'm saying I have to say that when Ben Wadowski says, let's stop pretending college degrees don't matter, he's talking about the fact, he ends it that he says, we often hear that the strong preference for degrees isn't fair to the majority of Americans who didn't go to college, but that majority is falling fast. And the percentage of college educated American adults is pushing 50% when associate degrees are included. And while the percentage of black and Latino college graduates is significantly lower, it is far higher than a few decades ago. In fact, in 1960, only 41% of Americans had completed high school. It might have been plausible then to argue that plenty of dropouts had great talents and were unfairly penalized by high school diploma requirements. But it would have been badly misguided to oppose efforts to vastly improve high school graduation rates, which stand at 91% today. Final sentence, he says, college degree requirements aren't sacred, but they reflect the unmistakable reality that higher education helps people do well. That's true. But here's the challenge. And here's where what we're doing and what everybody else is doing who is working and what we're working, and why connecting people is so important in that work. All of that is important. That's why it's important. This is why it's important. The hierarchy in this society that has some people of African descent thinking the best way they can advance collective interests of African people is to get to the most elite white spaces and influence them or commingle with them or challenge them from the inside. All that, I'm not here to critique any of that. I'm saying that is the strategy that has been developed in part. At the other end of this, no, at the center of the community. See, that's on the periphery of the community. You're talking about a tiny group of people. The best you can hope in those spaces is that that tiny group of people on the periphery of the social structure that we live in now is connected to the core group, because the core group is the majority. Most people in this country, most people of African descent in the world are in the core group. The periphery is the black elites in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in North America, Canada, United States, wherever. Those quote unquote elites, the challenge is representation. We've talked about that. When you walk in the room, are you walking in the room by yourself, or are you walking in the room, as Anna Julia Cooper said, with the race, with the people, rather, to borrow from Shamarka Cater, who said, I don't use the word race, I use the word populations. So the people of African descent, are you representing us? Now, representing us doesn't just mean your face is black. Even in Oppenheimer, I was laughing last night looking at the movie, and every once in a while you see a little black face. Here's a black woman student clapping at Berkeley. And I'm saying, was there a black woman student there? Now I got to do the research again and go back, because I know it's not an American Prometheus. There was a black guy at Los Alamos. You see him cheering after the bomb is going off, and you see catch a glimpse of a black dude. I'm saying, is that a carpenter? Is he a scientist? We got to look, because we know we had Mr. Brother Loeb, Henry Loeb, as Professor Hunter and I always talk about. The brother was reporting for the Cleveland Calling Post in the wake of Hiroshima, who had a background in science, a degree in science, but it was also a trained journalist who was writing in the black newspapers, Amsterdam News, about the effects of the bomb and radiation, who caught it before any of the social structure white newspapers did, like the New York Times, which is why they highlighted Loeb years later to credit themselves for discovering a Negro who was writing in the black press. So I'm not saying there weren't black people around or there or in, just like indigenous people or white women who were in. There are a couple of white women you see prominently displayed in the movie. But what I'm saying is that this kind of diversity approach, there's absolutely the logic of many people who were at Harvard and Yale and Stanford and places like that, University of Pennsylvania, Brown, University of Chicago, who are at those institutions. And also, quite frankly, the logic of some people increasingly at historically black colleges and universities. I'm thinking about academic administrators, not the teachers. not the students. Although increasingly the students are gravitate toward this idea that if you come to a HBCU, you too can make it. What does make it mean? Get a Wall Street job, become somebody who can work in Disney and Hollywood. All that's important stuff, but let's be clear. HBCU logics that form in that direction are, I often say, you know, those type of administrators should probably stop saying that they represent or making policy for HBCUs. Their philosophy is DEIUs. It's a DEIU philosophy. It can be debated, it can be discussed, things can be pulled from it, but ultimately the idea that they are rock solid certain that this is the way that Black people should go is patently absurd, because it reinforces the hierarchies that we are trying to explode, which means that when we're in space like this on Saturdays, when we're in Nubia every day of the week, when we're compiling a narrative, this huge archive and resource center to join with all other forces, what we are saying is we are doing it from a space that starts with us at the center, and the us is the overwhelming majority of people. So the access is not restricted by the Mother May I magic words that get you into Cambridge or get you into Cal Berkeley or get you into West Philadelphia at University of Pennsylvania or somehow find your way into Rhode Island at Brown. No, the Mother May I is pause, center yourself, use your technology to access, and come on in this space. Listen, write something down, unmute yourself, come over on Monday nights, let's have conversation, put a post in, have somebody respond, then you respond. You develop all that rhythm, and that's the jailbreaking process that we haven't, we're not trying to achieve, we have achieved, even as we continue to try to expand it.
But there's no degree, right? So as you're talking, even as I think about John McWhorter and others, there's a benefit to the commentary, right? There's a benefit to these universities being what you call them, right? Because that's how you get money. That's how you get money so that you can keep the lights on. So I don't even think they've thought whether or not they're there to help the students as much as college president's main job. And I tell my students this is to raise money. We think college presidents are these, you know, scholarly folk who are there to help you learn more. No, they're there to raise. It is a business. I tell my students this day one. So don't spend 6-7 years in here getting a liberal arts degree. This is a business that is here to take your money. And we professors are here to serve you. So even professors that are abusive to students got it twisted. Like you're only there because students pay money to come to school. Right. So even the folk that are on TV or at these conferences or being paid tens of thousands of dollars to speak in different places, there's a benefit because they get paid to talk that talk. And at some point, you know, much like some of my friends that I don't really speak to anymore, I realized, and so I can't even call them my friends, right? I realized because I'm also juxtaposing them to what it is that I am committed to doing. I can't really hate on them, but they have forgotten, the money is so good, Dr. Carr, that at some point you've convinced yourself that you're doing it for the high. So I'm gonna talk this talk, even though I don't believe it. But at some point you might believe it, the things that you're saying.
Right.
And so, there's a point of no return. And for those of us who consume this content, how do we discern who's there to help, and how do we even suss out what's right and what's wrong? Because it's a lot of noise. It's a lot of noise. So how, what skills do we need to be able to say, oh, I like this person. They make me feel good and I'm rah-rahing for the moment. But that question from Sonia Sanchez, how do it free us, doesn't enter the equation. And we don't really even know how to navigate that question.
I think we have the innate ability as humans. I think that institutions matter, which is why what we're doing is so valuable. And we hear it over and over again, as we've been talking about. And we know both of us know as teachers, when we are interacting with students and have content for them to consider, what invariably begins to emerge is the application of those innate abilities to problem solving. The challenge is the content isn't provided. That's why the metaphor of breadcrumbs that you gave us at the very beginning was so very important. Breadcrumbs are important, but you won't necessarily pick them breadcrumbs up if you're by yourself.
But even that, I mean, we're both individuals. I'm in the other chat. Texas girl mom, she's a teacher. She says she used to teach Shakespeare like it was The Young and the Restless. And she said she had her kids, who had older grandparents. looking at the stories like they were soap operas and 500-year-old Victor Newman or Jack Abbott, like she would make it relevant to them. But that's an individual's creativity. That's not a system. There's no like textbook for the next teacher to learn how to teach Shakespeare through the lens of Young and the Restless or One Life to Live at General Hospital. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
well, if there was a time when she would have been in a school, in a segregated school, where everybody knew that, and where those teachers knew each other, and the students could gravitate toward the teachers whose styles they benefited. Of course, desegregation smashed that. Now the Black teachers not there, but in some ways, this is a space like that. Like if she were here doing that right now, there will be other teachers who will pick up on that. And of course, what we have with Nubia is the capacity now with the teachers lounge for people to connect with people, so that I heard you, I tried that out, or here's what I do, and they exchange. The thing that's missing, not missing, the thing that remains our challenge is to then have that translate into real life. And that's what we saw in Kemet. People who knew each other well in Nubia, people who knew each other well from being in class, who then the first time they physically saw each other and interacted, it sparked another level of developing common work, shared work. That was the theme every day. How are we going to keep this shared work going? And so it seems incremental. I was walking off campus Thursday afternoon, finished my class, and coming down the hill, and there was a cluster of administrators standing there who, I knew a couple of them. I spoke. One of the sisters breaks off from the group as I'm coming down here. So Carr says, I'm a Nubian. It's working. The point is this. The whole idea is people are now taking things back. We don't know the rooms people are in that would say, I saw this teaching method. I think this is fascinating. So the curriculum development conversation, say in Paterson, New Jersey, with a teacher's professor development, where somebody saw that sister here do that and say, let's try this. You can't quantify. This is a society where if you can't quantify it, you can't get a grant.
And that's my point. So how does one benefit, and as I think about the administrators at my school, the ones at your school, they don't even know what we do in the classroom. They don't even know. Like I'm looking at my department teaching journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what is journalism today? Like, how are you teaching these kids for what exactly? So I made a commitment this year, to teach them the business of media and how to really, understand what is media, what is not media, and how, like to be developed as people. They're going to get a broad range of experiences, and then they're going to have their sleeves rolled up and get hands-on. But that's not something that could have been on a syllabus that I could, you know what I'm saying, that I could even share with somebody, because it's my lived experience that I'm bringing to the table. It's not something that the school can codify or even monetize. You know what I'm saying?
When you share it here, and those students go back into wherever they're in school and ask the professor about what you shared here, it breaks down. In other words, that's what we can do. Like, we can't control Howard, Hunter, Morehouse. We can't control, but what we can control is, like, what we do here is what we do there. And we're putting it in a place where, as more and more people, anybody who comes can now take that back in those spaces. To me, that's what Jailbreaking is. We're not trying to change those systems, because those systems are unsustainable and they will collapse under their own weight, or they will have to be transformed. Every generation, people challenge the university as concept. We saw it at Hunter. That's why there was a Black and Puerto Rican Studies step. We saw it at Howard. That's where there's an African Studies. That was 69. Then in the late 80s, you see another wave. Then you see another wave in the early arts. And we just saw another wave in the last couple of years in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. These things reach inflection points. And that's why even with the March on Washington, it's important, because it's not the ritual, it's the conditions that force the ritual. You see, it's not the ritual, it's the conditions that force the ritual. Now, at that moment, what do you do with that moment? And so what we're doing here, what we're doing in narrative, what we're doing in Nubia, what we're doing every week in class with this really inestimable global convening, like a metronome every Saturday, what we are doing is seeding, connecting, and getting out of the way. And then it becomes something that just continues to echo and impact. And that is beyond the capacity of structural education formations to disrupt. Somebody in the chat, in the first chat here in the app, mentioned, let me see, can I pull it up right quick, because people are talking real fast, and that's a beautiful thing. I love that. Mighty Eve said, I will never forget SCOTUS Supreme Court of the United States, Scalia, saying on record, in fact, black people are too stupid to go to college. This was based on the University of Texas. The University of Texas. Yeah, I remember that. That was oral arguments for Fisher, the Fisher case, Sarah Fisher versus University of Texas, Austin. The affirmative action case that was most important prior to this summer. And Scalia, who of course died, as you mentioned, before he could ever write encode his foolishness, was like, HBCUs, maybe that's good, because maybe the students shouldn't aspire to go to the University of Texas, Austin. Maybe they should go to a slower track school. I embrace that. I embrace it wholeheartedly. I embrace Justice Scalia's elitism, because my elitism makes his elitism look like nothing. Because your people ain't never built no pyramids, no tombs, no temples. They didn't invent a writing system that influenced everything. They didn't create the calendar system that we use today. They weren't the first astronomers. I mean, that's not your people, Tony. Tony, Sky. In fact, your people are our people are your people's great-great-grandmothers and fathers. So, if we talk about slower school, we perhaps need to go to 12th century and 13th century and go to Europe. But for the origins of the university system we have now, that has us still walking around in hot-ass monastic robes in May, as if that's somehow some testament to higher education. But if you want to dance, Chief, we can dance, sir. We can go through all of world history, and then we can play that game, but you'll lose. So if you want to come back and have that dance, you can. But the point that's being raised is a very important point. What we're doing ain't got nothing to do with none of that. Meaning what? We're not talking about Ivy League schools or HBCUs. We're not talking about community colleges or public education versus private education. We're talking about a readily accessible resource that we can all have access to, that we all have influence in shaping, that strips the mask off of these institutions and leaves us with the ability to discern what we can and can't get from those institutions. You go to school for licensure. You go for skill development. You go to be exposed to ideas. You can get exposure to ideas here every Saturday. You can get skill development in narrative and Nubia as practitioners do this work. And you can then decide for yourself which is the price point in terms of point of entry that you're going to pay for enhanced skill development, exposure to more content, and also licensure and cachet. A great deal of the Ivy League thing is the brand. They got hella resources. You got a lot of stuff you can't get other places. But I will say this, parenthetically, I will put what we do every week, what we do on Monday nights and office hours, against any class or any conversation anywhere in the country. Any place. Perhaps even especially the so-called Ivy League. And then the thing is, we're open. Anybody who's from there and want to come in this space, we can have a conversation about it. But here's the thing. What it reveals is what you can and can't get from those spaces, and what's important and what's not in those spaces. And so I'm saying all that in the context of, this ritual moment, March on Washington, remembering, because, and then again, that was just parenthetically, what we're doing is creating a space where we can all convene. And convening is critically important. What we have to do to take another step in the direction of having this continue to be very useful and transformative in social groups, we have to remind ourselves of who we are, how we have moved, and remember these things. So I want to, let me see if I have, yes. I'm gonna put this up. I was gonna mention this one, but I'm not going to. That book. Yesterday I spent the day in Baltimore at a funeral, a ritual of initiation into eternity, as we would call it, a homegoing, as some folk call it, for my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Audrey May Byrd. This is Audrey Byrd. Audrey Byrd was a member of the faculty at Howard University for decades. She was the director of the Walter Annenberg Center and the Walter Annenberg program. Annenberg, of course, that's the Reader's Digest family. They give out so much money. USC has an Annenberg school. University of Pennsylvania has an Annenberg school. Howard University has an Annenberg program. They gave a few coins for an honors program in the School of Communications. And so we went up yesterday to the ritual of initiation into eternity at Doswell Cathedral, Church of God in Christ. Kojic. That's why I said I was in Baltimore all day. You gotta love Black people. So I was sitting in there with a bunch of former Howard students. A lot of her babies were there, so-called babies. Victoria Kirby organized a bunch of folk. And then there were others there, the former members of the board of the Anna Byrd program. Some of her closest children, Angie Porter is one. Angie's mother actually came into town. Miss Jordan was there, Barbara Jordan, who attended it with the funeral as well. Angie's, sister, who is a television reporter, anchor, and reporter in Memphis right now. Brittany, she and Brittany were together. Brittany Moncrief from Southfield, Michigan. Y'all know Detroit. Southfield is an island in Detroit. Good sister, brilliant sister. In fact, they traveled to Kemet together with us back in 2009. Giselle Hunt was there, who went on that trip as well. But anyway, they're all grown now, children. Fatu Sal, who teaches at Howard now. All of these were the children of Audrey Byrd. Audrey Byrd had like one life with an extension. In some ways, the Howard people, as Vicky said yesterday at the ritual, the Howard people looked at her as theirs, as a quote unquote bison, because she shaped so many lives, so many young people. I mean, brilliant sister. Again, she's over the honors program in the School of Sea until she retired in 2020. But she was born and raised in Baltimore, and she never left her church. In fact, her godparents were the founding bishop of the church. And so her anchor, her center, her way of knowing, her governance formation was Church of God in Christ, was Doswell Cathedral, Church of God in Christ. And as one of the elders who spoke yesterday, who was 7 years old when Audrey was 6 and they went to school together, she said when she moved to DC to go to Howard, first as an undergraduate, and then as a member of the faculty years later, she said, we're like, Audrey, you leaving? She said, no, my home is in Washington, D.C. I live there, but my church is in Baltimore. And she would be up and down that highway constantly. She was the minister of music, a beautiful, in fact, let me just mention this here. She began playing music at 4 years old, and by 8, she was playing for the Doswell Temple Senior Choir. She was the minister of music at Doswell Temple. Talking about ways of knowing, centers and peripheries. Elite institutions, no, the people. This is our governance formation. And it was on display yesterday. She played in all the services, wrote music. She was the minister of music for the Maryland Central Jurisdiction Church of God in Christ. And she wrote an original composition, I Will Do a New Thing. If you got the African American hymnal, some of y'all know what I'm talking about. I didn't pull my copy. I know I got about 2 copies around here. I hope they both ain't in storage. Go to the African American hymnal and look at number 568. Reverend Dr. Wright, Trinity United, Carl Otis and them tell them, look at number 568. Maybe put it in the rotation for Sunday in memory of Audrey Mae Byrd, because I Will Do a New Thing is her composition. She's in the African American hymnal. The people at Howard say, oh, it's our professor, our beloved teacher. Yes, it's very true. She worked in the DC public school systems. She did a lot of other things, but I'm just mentioning it today because that Kojic funeral, it's supposed to start at 11 o'clock. They started before 11 o'clock. The viewing was at 10. They had to start before. Why? Because, them Negroes played all of the good old good ones. I'm in there singing oh my God. They played all the good old good ones. Them old school songs. Audrey Byrd wasn't known as an old school pianist. She liked to play that kind of classical European stuff, but also the hymn. She was a master musician, choir director, all this. But yesterday they played that stuff. Boy, these Negroes got up once, started running up and down the side. I said, in a minute, it's going to be a bench walker in here. This is entirely appropriate. We sitting there, and this is what Angie Porter means when she says protocol. It's a protocol. It's how you move. And yesterday, I was in an Africana space, y'all. I mean, an Africana space, a space of African people, the music, the whole movement. I wish I could have transported my Black aesthetics, my afternoon class that I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Howard. I wish I could have transported them to that space, because on Thursday we went through some of these canons of cultural meaning making that I was talking about earlier that Robert Fritz Thompson identifies, polyrhythm or multiple meter as he would call it, the get down quality, how we'll go all the way down, come all the way back up in movement, in art, all these things, correct entry and exit, how you enter a space or exit a space, all this. I mean, that protocol was really on display. There was a sister who was like the deputy superintendent of education or instruction or religious education. She introduced the superintendent. Now, both these ladies had killer hats on. The little pillbox joint. The other lady, she had a pillbox with like sparkly stones in it. I almost looked like Elijah Muhammad Cooper. I'm like, this is a beautiful thing. Watch these Africans, of course, dressed in black. And the one sister, she spoke, she said, now let me introduce to you and bring to the dais the superintendent. You can't. Black people undefeated. Black women are gods, but but the whole point is, undefeated. Watching this protocol unfold. If all of our people think about this, and I asked my students in Education in Black America this on Tuesday morning in the class, teach that class. I said, how many of you all learned your first steps in protocol and education in something that I'm a graduate of? And I said, Vacation Bible, put my hand out, all of them, it's 100 kids in school. Vacation Bible School, VBS. What y'all know about VBS? People start sharing stories. I said, or its predecessor, Sunday School. This is because we're going to read a book, James Anderson's book, The Education of Blacks in the South, where he talks about coming out of enslavement. And even before the end of enslavement in the United States, Black people used the church to learn how to read. And so Sunday School becomes this. This is not Harvard. Harvard versus Sunday School. No, Sunday School wins every time. In fact, if you got some home training, another word for protocol, you know that your literacy started before you ever went into the schoolhouse door. And if you were lucky, the teachers were an extension of your community. That's what they smashed during Jim Crow and 54. That's what they were talking about or avoiding in Massachusetts last week, which I'm going to come to back in a second, top that Walter Massey story and bring it forward. But before I do that, I just want to again re-emphasize what we're talking about right now. We're talking about how you work collectively to common purpose and how education, even if started as an individual point of entry, can quickly find others. So it isn't just resources, Harvard and Yale, it's support. And it isn't just support that says, I want you to come to me. No, it's support that says, I'm coming from the center, from the core, and I will take this to the peripheries. But the peripheries don't define me. It is the core to define me. So the point, let me finish up this point. Walter Massey stood up. Former president of Morehouse, before that, provost, University of California, Berkeley, when they ended Affirmative Action in California. Later on the board of the community colleges of Chicago. So those of Chicago, you know, Kim, Dr. Delaney, you all know, Valethia Watkins, my colleague at Howard now, taught at Olive Harvey. So you've got Kennedy King, you've got Malcolm X, the community colleges of Chicago. Walter Massey says, we got a lot more institutions than these Ivy League schools. He's sitting in the vineyard. He says, I enjoyed the conversation, but let me put this in. In a way, he gestured toward what Luce identified in that article from Financial Times. The vast majority of human beings, they're never going to see the indoors of a church, of an Ivy League school. And contrary to what Skip Gates, misrepresenting into my reading, W.E.B. Du Bois had to say about integrating from the top down, the Vernon Jordan philosophy. That transformation is not going to come from that way. Not that we shouldn't have some people in there fighting. I think we absolutely should. But please do not mistake the periphery for the core. The core is the people, is us, to the degree that we can create a us. After Dr. Massey finished, nobody said anything, because they ain't here for that conversation. And Charlene Hunter Galt, who was moderating, said, that is an interesting topic for another panel. Skip, you'll have to do that one. He said, no, please. As Ethiopians say, I love how highly, when they use the word excuse me, the phrase excuse me, it's like, we're going to disrupt that. That's another panel for another day. I can hear, excuse me. In other words, we must stop right now. Forgive me for disrupting whatever you was about to say next, but you about to miss the point. Dr. Massey made the point. The point is, y'all up in here talking about getting 3 more Negroes in Harvard and how, with the dilemma or not of how to do it, with some brilliant minds. Randall Kennedy, Melissa Murray, you know, John McWhorter, you know, Henry Louis Gates, whatever you want to think, having this argument. Okay, it's very nice. But the vast majority of people are not in that conversation. And what we're doing puts all that formal institutional education institutions closer to the periphery anyway, because what we're doing is in a deliberate, determined work to reduce our reliance on that kind of hierarchy, because that's not going to free us. It can be used as a tool, but it's not going to free us. Now, as if after that non-applause, if you watch the video, you see what they're clapping on, not clapping on, and you understand this very well-heeled community, you know, I'm not saying majority white, but it looked like it was. I don't know. I've never been there, but a lot of y'all have. Some of y'all have. A young sister gets up after Massey and says, I got a question, and I'm not going to belabor it because I wrote it down. She says, she basically asks, how does this, and in fact, you could probably pull it up, Professor Hunter, but it's the Affirmative Action Hutchins, Hutchins. The Hutchins is a woman and man, husband and wife, who've given millions of dollars to Harvard. In fact, Gates made the point at the beginning, they've given more money to African American studies than any African American studies program in history. Yeah. But we got people. There are two superpowers in the world. One is nuclear weapons, I guess maybe money. The other is the people, and the people are really the superpower. So as we're growing, we're not going to be distracted by, somebody gave a bunch of money. Okay, and so you wrote another book and 1,000 people read it. That's great. 1,500, what? 2,000 people. Okay, that's a fraction. It's a fraction compared to what we're doing. And we can even read that book together and have some comment. In other words, don't get distracted. The people are the superpower in society. And the more you organize, the more we come together, the more we can transform. Anyway, the sister comes up after Massey, and she says, it's near the end of the conversation. She reads off her phone, and she basically says that post Brown versus Board of Education, there was this increasing desire to adopt white values, white structure, white access, and higher education. How has the undermining of Black institutions, where values, structures, what Angie Porter would say, protocol, comes into play, how is the undermining of that defeating what we want to do? And she said anybody can answer, and she named this guy Lee, who writes for the New Yorker, Asian American. She said, I would like anybody to answer, including you. And so he begins to answer. He said, that's interesting. I haven't really thought about that. I guess there's a struggle going on in the Bay Area right now, where you got Black teachers saying that, they understand that the unique challenges facing Black students. And why is it that when a school closes, any school closes, it has to be the Black school? And then you hear a smattering of applause. Clearly some Black people trying to get something going, because you hear the hard clap. When you try to get everybody to clap, it dies very quickly. And then he goes on and says, so I don't really know if that's a good answer, but he don't have any idea on the history of education among African people in this country. And that's not a critique of him, not his area. But he tried to answer the question. After that, Charlene Hunter-Goff says, anybody else? Melissa Murray, Randall Kennedy, John McWhorter said nothing. Walter Massey and that sister asked the only relevant questions that day, and they couldn't answer. Why? Because our focus isn't on the we. Our focus is on the me and the you and the you, and getting into Harvard and from the top down changing everything. How's that working out for you? But the point is this: the collective work we're talking about has moments within a governance formation. A governance formation that was on display yesterday at Doswell Cathedral when we were at the ritual for hours of Audrey Byrd and watching the protocols. Not without criticism. A lot of men in the ministry. There were some women, but not a lot of men, not a lot of women sitting on that podium. And the podium was full. It's Kojic. We was going in and said, this is Kojic. So we're going to be here. And I'm here for it. My God. The music and the organist was in control of the whole room. This Negro, and they got a program, right? So, but he over there that rumbling, and you see people start moving. And this ain't in the program where I'm gonna send everybody up out this church. The ushers were flawless. Somebody said, where the funeral program? So everybody calm down. These ushers are pros. I'm watching these ushers. Why? They're going to wait till everybody's seated. Then they're going to come down the aisle, count program one by one, and hand them out. Why? You Negroes ain't program hoarding. But if you're a professional, if you know what you look, this is Black. You talk about Black excellence. You want to see excellence? Go to the old school Black church. Go to the Black mosque. Go to the protocol of the Black barbershop or beauty parlor and just sit, as most deaf might say, observe the excellence in this. This is what we see. Now, at a critical moment, it's getting hot for these Negroes in here. What do they pass out? Professor Hunter, if they're at church and it's getting hot, what are they going to pass out?
A fan, of course, a fan.
It's a fan, right? Who's
right.
Who's going to be
Martin
on
Luther King better be on that fan. Martin Luther King better be on. You better do that. Yes.
Now, I apologize to the stalwart ushers of Doswell Cathedral Church of God in Christ for my moment of petty theft. I'm sorry, because I saw them collecting the fans, but I must. I asked the sister, please, can I have a Martin Luther King Jr.? She said, yes, sir. I said, thank you. Thank you, Nana. I appreciate that because I need this fan. Oh my goodness. There's a museum. Somebody in Nubia will know if y'all put in, or even later on in YouTube, you put somebody had to post that there's a church fan collection. I think Randy Burkett and his scavengers got a hold of it at Emory, maybe, because it may have been part of the Hatch Billups collection. Anyway, but there are extant collections of church fans. Maybe Auburn Avenue. I was been so many places this summer. Maybe it's the Schaumburg. Anyway, there are people can look for it. But I got a few of these. But this Martin Luther King, come on. The reason I bring this up is because there's an American flag motif behind him, and there's Dr. King. Toward the end of his life, when he's gained a lot of weight, the man didn't make it to 40 years old. This stress and eating late and smoking cigarettes and all that stuff is just taking its impact on him. But to this day, ritually wise, children who can't tell you, adults can't tell you much about the March on Washington, but you go in the right Baptist church, Kojic church, Methodist church, Catholic, Black Catholic church, if they hand out the fans, it's going to be Martin Luther King on the fan. He's in heavy rotation still, as Dante would say, to this day. He's still in heavy rotation. And this is the weekend when I Have a Dream will be played ad infinitum. This, of course, is the you can get the collections are everywhere, but I like this one because this one James Washington edited. I Have a Dream: Writings and Speeches That Changed the World, because Coretta Scott King wrote the introduction, and this is a cheap edition, Harper, San Francisco, still in print. But Dr. King gave that address, and the first part of that speech, Clarence Jones, who's supposed to be there today, Clarence Jones was one of Dr. King's lawyers, one of his confidants, one of his people who would draft language for him. I don't hesitate to call them speech writers, because as Andrew Young said, it's impossible to be a speech writer for Martin Luther King, but who generated language for him. Sometimes he would riff on it. Sometimes he would do it verbatim. Sometimes he would just take it as inspiration. The great Vincent Harding always talked about and wrote about later how he helped with the Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam speech from April 1967. Clarence Jones was in the conversations Dr. King was having that led up at the Willard Hotel, that led up to the speech that he gave August 28th, 1963. Clarence Jones is still here, an ancestor. Hopefully he'll be 102 for the 70th anniversary, but he's here in 92 for the 60th. And he has a memoir that just came out, bio, Last of the Lions. So if you want to read more about Clarence Jones, you can. He also wrote a book on the speech itself and how he helped. And he talks about Dr. King being in a room with his lieutenants, and they're talking about what he should talk about. And he asked Clarence, "You taking notes?" Clarence said, "I wasn't, but I will." And he told Clarence, "Write down what you think people want me to say. Different people. Sit down, look at some stuff, listen, and put down a few." So Clarence Jones said, "I put together 7 paragraphs." And he said, "I was shocked when King got up that day that the first 7 paragraphs of what he said were what I wrote verbatim."
Wow.
Now, how do you check the veracity of that? There are papers, the Martin Luther King papers at Stanford. I suspect that when volume 8 comes out, we've all been waiting on volume 8. There's a new director there taking over for Clay Carson, who was the longtime editor of the papers. 7 volumes have been out. I'm looking around like I could put my hands on all 7. They're around here somewhere. But volume 8 will be coming out, and that's the volume that will include the March on Washington stuff, correspondence and things like that. But of course, when we hear Dr. King say 50 years ago, 100 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation, this momentous decree came as a great beacon light, the hope of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. Paragraph 1. That's Clarence Jones. Paragraph 2. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Clarence Jones said, I had worked with King so long by then that I had his cadence, his voice in my head. Speechwriters do that. Now, Dr. King is not here to say, Clarence, you know that wasn't word for word, but it's probably close enough. Again, this is a governance conversation. We're not looking for social structure commentaries. We're talking here in the space. He goes on and says, 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished on the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. But this third paragraph, I think, is the one that we don't often talk about, but we talk about more and more because, again, ritual moments allow us to see how that point of inflection symbolizes what came before and what came after. The rituals aren't important in themselves. The rituals are important as moments to collect ourselves, to pause, to reflect, to be. That's why going to Audrey Byrd's funeral yesterday was so important for us because, this is who this sister is. This is who she is. This is who she was to you. This is who she was to you. But when you come here to the core, to the people, to the place, you see who she is in her fullness. And some people, for the first time, found out that her life was not in the School of Communications at Howard University. Her life was in Baltimore, and that extension of her life was down there. And you can just see the transformation in addition to so much good music. My goodness, I almost jumped up and ran out on myself, but see, that would have been wild. Anyway, but so Dr. King here says, so we've come here today to dramatize. This is what marches are for, dramatization, high theater. So we've come here to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, the gendered language is there. That's got to change. In fact, in about 5 minutes, I put my timer on, we're going to get to the meat of the March on Washington, because we've talked about this before. If you go to session 64, session 77, you'll see us talking about it. But we're going to take it to one of the sisters who we recover our momentum of memory by thinking with, by reading what she wrote. And that, of course, is the only woman who was on the planning committee of the March on Washington. The only woman, one of the only people who carried over from the March on Washington movement of the 40s to now. And that is our friend and ancestor who we've talked about extensively in this space, Anna Arnold Hedgeman, whose name I doubt will be raised today on the National Mall, either because people don't know or people just haven't taken the time to want to know how important she was to that ritual in 63, how she was important to the ritual in 41 that created the template for the ritual in 63. And anybody ever come to the United States Capitol to protest, to have a march, owes a debt in part to Anna Arnold Hedgeman, because she was critical to this. And she also wrote a long memo where she critiqued the fact, where are the sisters to speak today? And there were sisters who spoke. We'll get to that in a second. Again, I got the saying running on the 5-minute timer now, so I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes on this question of Dr. King's speech, which the social structure has conveniently excised, shrunken to the last part of the speech that Clarence Jones didn't write, that mimics almost word for word a speech he had given in Detroit a month before with C.L. Franklin at his side, where they had at a very important convening where you hear a lot of what you hear in I Have a Dream. He had preached it as a speech sermon in Detroit. It is a recording called A Great March on Washington. And there's another recording that Berry Gordy released under another label. And I have it around here somewhere. Again, I'm not going to look around for it. You can find it on YouTube, where you hear the Detroit speech. He mentions Emmett Till and others in that speech. But at any rate, so just a few more seconds on this speech, where the part that has been excised and looped, the end part, the I Have a Dream part, is the only thing people want to hear. But that's not what they're going to be talking about today on the National Mall. They're going to try to use that ritual moment to reinforce the larger arc, the march for job and justice, the question of the structure of society right now. I don't know that they're going to raise the larger international issues, although they should, because they tend to shy away from it. And that's what Dr. King was doing, which is one of the reasons his life was endangered and ultimately ended. The challenge of these ritual moments is to remember the momentum of what we've been doing before, what happened then and after that. And again, to be able to distinguish on what's important and what's not, how to tell the difference. Moments like this, sessions like this, help us by introducing us to other events, other lives, other memories that allow us points of entry to do that other work for ourselves, and then come together collectively and supporting each other, just like helping spotting somebody when they're lifting at the gym, or walking with somebody as their walking buddy, or being their study buddy. We have a global study buddies now, and we come together to reinforce that. So at any rate, thinking about this in terms of the difference between now and then. Since 1963, there has been a steady attack, continuing attack on Black institutions. There's never been a time when Black institutions haven't been under attack. But there's also been this reinforcement of this propaganda that somehow the aspiration for proximity to whiteness was guiding or should guide non-white aspirations. This is the obsession in part with affirmative action. Although what the white nationalists are after isn't just the educational institutions, maybe even is not primarily the educational institutions. What these white nationalists want to do, and you see it now as they begin to launch assaults on hiring practices, launch on assaults on employers, they want to get rid of the non-white presence in any area of U.S. life that they can. They don't want you working. I mean, if they thought it would help them, they would, as the saying almost runs out, they thought they might attack hiring Black people at Walmart. I was going to work, going to school Tuesday morning, and passed by the Walmart on Georgia Avenue, and a couple got on the bus, because I'm never paying for parking again. I mean, come on now. I can take the 70 and go, or the 79 and go to campus, get off, and it's a beautiful thing. Plus, I get to talk to the people on the bus. A couple got on and said, you know, plus, I mean, you pay me and then you want me to give you 2 stacks, 3 stacks back to park. That's cool. I get that money to the city, DC. But a couple got on. They are viewers of In Class. They had just finished working the overnight shift at Walmart, restocking the shelves, cleaning the store, and we had about a 20-minute conversation about labor practices, about working conditions at Walmart, about the range of issues. And when I tell you, these are 2 African people who came up from Louisiana following the sister's mother, because her mother said, I got to leave Louisiana. She's born and raised in Louisiana. It reminds me of Adolph Reed's book, The South. Jim and Jane Crow is real. She said, I got to get the hell out of here. Moved to DC maybe 40 years ago. They eventually came up. They married. They say together they make enough to be halfway comfortable living, just working on their work, their regular shifts, their 10 to 7 shifts at Walmart. I've been working for Walmart for a number of years, then came to this one. But, the thing that struck me was we were having a conversation. I was reading the paper about the BRICS summit. We were talking about substantive things. And this is not the university that I was going to. This is the university of the 70 bus. There's a university on the 70 bus. And what we're doing, that's one of those things where you're not going to fill out a spreadsheet. You're not going to take a census. How many people are listening? How many people are having conversation based on the conversations we have here regularly every week? We can never tally that. We could just see the impact. And I can randomly get on public transportation and run into people who are in this conversation. That lets me know that whatever Skip and them was doing at the church over there in Massachusetts, that's beautiful. Keep doing it. But this is a difference between what Walter Massey was trying to put on the table, what their young sister was trying to put on the table, and what y'all talking about. And just go ahead and talk, but you're talking on the periphery. You're in this social structure conversation. You're not at the core. You're not in the governance formation and the ritual. So yeah, when I got this Martin Luther King fan, it made me think about that gloss, because of course behind him is this American flag. He didn't diss the American flag. He couched his stuff in patriotism and all that. But Dr. King, who is still seen in terms of cultural meaning making. That's what a fan is. It's a portable totem. It's a totem, kind of a portable shrine, rather. In terms of movement and memory, Martin Luther King, who is he to us? Anytime you can put a cat on a fan and the only other male you might see like that is Jesus, then you understand. In fact, I gave a talk at the National Archives years ago called Abraham Lincoln, American Jesus. And I said, if George Washington is the father, and Abraham Lincoln is the son, in terms of the second birth and the Emancipation Proclamation and Lincoln's second inauguration, George Washington's your father. Abraham Lincoln is your son. But there's a trinity in the way that y'all messed up the Kemetic cosmology. So you replaced the woman, you got the Holy Ghost, no problem. I said, who's the Holy Ghost? You got Father, you got Son. Well, we should go with Martin Luther King. Why? Because in 1963, he's standing in front of the ripped off roof on Abu Simbel and the other Egyptian temples, where you got Abraham Lincoln sitting in his Ramesses pose in the chair in the Egyptian temple column looking place. And you got the black man in front saying, we're here in front of this statue to tell you, you owe us. And the check came back in the fourth paragraph. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. So King said, I'm standing up in front of this Abraham Lincoln rock to say, run me my coin. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that because I'm being a little flip about that. I don't want to get into this whole nativist, because what they're talking about is not reparations. What some of this stuff is about restitution. And that's a whole nother principle. We have to think about that even from a legal perspective. I think the logics fail. But what King is saying is, we're going to confront you now with what Randall Robinson called the debt. But do not confuse the debt with who we are to each other, who these people are confronting you with this. This is very important. Why? Randall Robinson wrote his book, The Debt, in 1999, 2000. I encourage people want to talk about reparations, start with that book. Don't start with any other book. Start with The Debt. And then a couple of years later, after we had read that book with about 250 teenagers in Philadelphia, and he came to see us, and he included us in the second book he wrote, which in many ways for me was the spark for me to begin to think about the difference between who we are to other people and who we are to each other. The debt is anchored in us, but it's the critique of this structure we find ourselves in. In some ways, it becomes a critical text for me to think through the concept of social structure, who we are to other people. The next book he wrote in his trilogy, in some ways, was called The Reckoning, What Blacks Owe to Each Other. There's the language that provides the foundation. As I told him years later, not even years later, a couple of years later, when he came back to Freedom School to talk about his book on Haiti, as I told Baba Randall Robinson, that was the pillar that sparked the concept in my mind, along with Jacob Carruthers' work of governance, who we are to each other. And in that book, The Reckoning, he talks about what we owe to each other. Now, here's the class critique. Here's the analysis of how we create a we. The third book in that trilogy, in some ways, is his book, Quitting America, which is where he said, yeah, I'm leaving the country. And he went down, of course, St. Kitts, his wife, Hazel, Kalia, their daughter, who, of course, were at the ritual we talked about a couple of months ago that had a Shallow Baptist church. I'm leaving. I'll go back and forth. I'm still from Richmond. I still teach at Penn State in law school, but I'm going to live here in a black space where black people, and we can think differently about the world. This is how you got to displace race. That's why the whole conversation around race and affirmative action, no, as long as you're talking about race, you've missed the point. That's what I was talking about when we were in the Nile Valley for those 2 Saturdays, and then back last Saturday for the recap and kind of analysis where we go from here. Race is going to it's the trick bag you can never escape. The trick bag you can never escape. So, who we are to each other. Dr. King, in that speech, is presenting a critique of the social structure. He's not really talking to us as us. It's not who we are to each other. This is the balance. This is the challenge. The book I almost brought up a minute ago, and I guess I'll bring it up now because it kind of fits in the rhythm of what we're talking about as I kind of wind to a close. I'm going to use Anna Arnold Hedgeman to take us out today. Booker Washington and Black Progress. I was headed to class Thursday afternoon, and my man Baba Kwasi, who always sets up books and sells books in front of Crampton Auditorium, next usually to Baba Rafu, they're always selling books at Howard. This is a tradition that goes back even before, but one of the great booksellers who used to sell at that same folding table row right there was the great Paul Coates, as he was starting Black Classic Press and working at Moreland Spingarn. He sold books there. But I picked up this book, which I have, but it's in storage. And I wanted to consult this a little while back. It's called Booker T. Washington and Black Progress, Up from Slavery 100 Years Later. This is the 100th anniversary Brundage edited this. It was the 100th anniversary of Up From Slavery, and they put together a conference in the late 90s and then published this book of 10 chapters of papers evaluating the legacy of Booker Washington. And of course, Booker Washington, who argued that many people of our people during coming out of enslavement in the 1880s and 90s, Tuskegee founded 1881, they're not going to ever go to school. So we got to help them where they are. Cast down your bucket where you are, so to speak. And so it's very interesting to see this balanced critique, but also not, they say it's not a defense of Washington, but Washington's a complex figure. And one of the things they talk about is he wrote Up From Slavery for what we would call the social structure. It's an attempt to expand his profile, consolidate his power and authority to get resources for Black communities, even as he's clandestinely funding challenges Supreme Court, a case like Giles versus Harris, the Alabama voting rights case. Booker Washington's paying for the lawyers, but he can't let nobody know he's doing it. It's a complicated legacy of Booker Washington, but that's a social structure. But one of the things that the editor Brundage brings up in the introduction is he had written shortly before that, or had written for him, combination. And by the way, it's a great new book on Emmett Scott, Maceo Daly's book. I encourage y'all to get it. Elaine Jones, the Panther, who Emmett Scott was one of her ancestors, told me to get that book. Emmett Scott was Booker's man. I'm thinking about getting ghostwriters and stuff like that. Emmett Scott played roles in that. But at any rate, Booker Washington had written a different book, another memoir, another autobiography, The Story of My Life and Work. That's more of a governance book. I'm talking to Black people about Black things, in addition to others, but I'm talking for Up From Slavery is kind of like a trick bag of stuff. He's kind of creating this hagiographical autobiography. I did this. I will do. Thank you for this. White people helped me, and Black people got to do it. He's trying to position himself for money and influence. It's complicated. Anyway, I thought about that in the context of what I'm about to say. The difference between governance and social structure, we know. Governance is who we are to each other, our ways of knowing, our movement memory, our use of science and technology, our cultural meaning making. Social structure is the context in which we operate our governance formations. Nubia narrative in class, this work is governance work. Everybody's invited to be in it, in class. We're listening, we're commenting. Ultimately, though, we're talking to we. And if you can't talk to we in a way that other people can hear, that's their problem. It's not your problem. Those parts of it we want to have conversations with other people on. You just got to deal with it, which is why when Massey got up, when the sister got up, made those comments, and there wasn't no clapping, that's when I let you know that's a social structure audience you in. And on that panel, when nobody responded except the one dude who she called by name, these brilliant Black scholars, that let me know y'all don't want to say that. Because we all know it's true. You're chasing the white cloud. White cloud chasing is something that, you know, hey, it's a time-honored tradition, and particularly in the petty bourgeois community, but also throughout miseducated and diseducated communities of African descent. We understand this isn't a beating up of any individual. It's an observation that we must name the social structure. And so when Anna Hedgeman in 1962 and 63 is made aware that there's going to be a march on Washington, she's still working with A. Philip Randolph. Now, y'all remember who Anna Arnold Hedgeman was. You know, Dr. Hedgeman, who worked in the Truman administration, Federal Security Agency, worked on the Fair Practices Employment Committee, which came out of the first March on Washington movement in 1941, when she was working with Asa Philip Randolph. Became the first Black woman appointed to a city position in the city of New York when she worked in administration. And she was the only woman on the executive committee on the March on Washington of 1963. We know her two memoirs. I love it when people find these and take pictures of them and post them in social media. The Gift of Chaos. This is the second one she wrote, 1977. This is the one she wrote in 1964. The Trumpet Sounds, a memoir of Negro leadership. Her papers are at Wilberforce at the very museum that we broadcast from when we were out there with Kwaku Larry Crow and Mama Olabise Olode, who, when we were there for the Martin Delaney ritual, her papers are out there at Wilberforce. I encourage y'all to go out there and look for them. And we think about the difference between 60 years ago on Monday and today that draw people into this space. We know that white reconstruction and white lash continues. We've been following the attacks on affirmative action, the whole targeting of educational systems, the attacks on school boards, the attacks on school superintendents and teachers. We are not really following, as we should, the global developments, the BRICS summit, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They were winding up. They were just in South Africa, and we talked about that when we were in Egypt. It was very interesting to have that conversation. In fact, if I can pull it up quickly, I'll see if I can find yes, 6 new countries are joining the BRICS. Who's joining the BRICS? Who's coming in? You've got Saudi Arabia. You've got let me see, here we go, Argentina. Now, Brazil and India were wary because what they don't want, Brazil and India, like, we don't want China to be running the BRICS. We want China. You got to be here. Xi Jinping got the highest civilian award. In fact, if I have my Financial Times from the other day, I don't think I have it around here. They had the New York Times. Of course, the New York Times is always a day or two late when it comes to international stuff that affects us. But they showed Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, draping this award around Xi Jinping's neck. You know, if the BRICS list, everybody who applied for membership, it's a couple of dozen countries. Mexico talking about it. By the way, just very quickly, footnote, it made me think about it when I mentioned Mexico. Apparently, they're in a textbook fight in Mexico too. Let me take about 30 seconds here and go to see if I can find it quickly on the international page of today's paper. I thought it was the heat wave. No, that's not what we're talking about. Long time. No. Emerging nations, Iran. After no, and oh man, that's too bad. All right, I just have to slow it down for about maybe 10 more seconds. I thought it was nope, I thought it was in here, but it might have actually been in the Financial Times. They're battling over curriculum in Mexico. Apparently, the president of Mexico, these people don't like, maybe it's in the Financial Times. Give me a second here. Just a second. Because it might not be the Sarkozy. No. Okay. Although, while I had this up, Wagner's lucrative Africa operations left in limbo after Prigozhin's demise. Prigozhin's plane, of course, was shot down. I'm going to say less about that. But the last time Yevgeny Prigozhin was pictured alive was a video published on Monday from what was rumored to be Mali, in which the camouflage-clad warlord pledged to make Russia even greater on every continent and Africa even freer while brandishing an assault rifle. 48 hours later, Prigozhin's private plane crashed in mysterious circumstances in a field northwest of Moscow, killing him and everyone on board. And now, what is that going to do with Wagner in West Africa? I'm saying there's a lot of intrigue in this because, you know, now people are trying to say who's going to invade. Is France? Is the United States going to go in? Is the Economic Community of West African States led by Nigeria? They're going to go in and try to put down the coup in Mali. And then the people in Mali is like, or Niger rather, in Niger, and the people in Niger, many people saying, come on, if y'all want to fight, we're going to fight all of y'all. This ain't about no coup. This is about our independence. So it's very complicated. But Wagner is playing a big role in that because they're extracting wealth from Africa. They're extracting wealth. As John Clark said, in some stories, it ain't no good guys, but their man's been killed by the other bull, or at least that's the conjecture. But one thing's for sure, he's dead as a doornail. And does that disrupt Wagner? Anyway, I thought about that while I was looking. I'm going to try one more time because maybe what I can do is I'll just go to the international news on the table of contents because I wanted to see if I could. This is Saturday. Yeah, let me see. Just yeah. That now I make mistakes, but I usually don't make those kind of mistakes. I was thinking maybe it wouldn't be in national. It would be in Tim Scott. Nobody's talking about Tim Scott. Sorry, Tim. We're not going to talk about people either. We're in solidarity with the people who are not talking about you. Oh, you found it. Good. So the let me wind this up. The BRICS summit, as I said, a couple of dozen people want to join. Countries want to join. But who joined this week was Argentina. Argentina joined. Brazil said, okay, they caped for them. It's okay. Egypt joined. We just left Egypt. We saw the devaluation of their currency. One of the things the BRICS have is the development bank. Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, before the Trump of the tropics, so to speak, ran against and tried to put her in jail and accuse her of corruption, all this kind of thing. She's now the head of the development bank. They want to loan money to countries in their currency. So the real, if you're loaning to Brazil, the rand, if you're loaning to South Africa, the renminbi, the currency of China, is as a default currency in the development bank that BRICS has created. The third of the five, Ethiopia. Ethiopia has joined the BRICS. Iran has joined the BRICS. And if you heard some screaming in London and Washington, D.C., that's because Iran was added with this huge, vast, proven oil reserves added to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa formation. And the last one, probably heard a little grumbling too, the Saudis. No, I'm sorry. The Saudis are the next to last. The next is the United Arab Emirates. What does it mean for Iran, UAE, and Saudi Arabia to join the BRICS? The world is shifting.
Isn't that what got Gaddafi killed?
How about that? Yes, whatever Gaddafi's flaws were, whatever his ambitions were or not, one thing he said was we must all be united. In fact, he drove from Libya to Ghana for the meeting of the African Union to show we got roads. You ain't got to fly over stuff. Yeah, this guy got to go. We got water. It's a desert. No, there's water underneath the desert. We're going to use this money to develop these aquifers and we're going to turn the desert into a green bloom. Oh, this guy, what the hell?
So what are they going to do with this? Because there's no singular figure now to get rid of.
Well, I think this is the challenge there.
Which I also think is instructive, since we're talking about the 60th anniversary or commemoration of the March on Washington. The singular figure being taken out is an easy, remedy.
That's right.
But these entities, these systems coming together, and as Black people anywhere in the world, how should we be watching BRICS and the gathering, the convening?
Well, like I said, a lot of folks in Nubia, Baba Oz, probably first and foremost, well, a lot of people have been talking about BRICS. And of course, Jackie Cole is over there in South Africa. She's been helping us understand the implications in some ways. But I think the central challenge we have in terms of study is to be exposed to enough different material so that we can begin to make up our own minds, not just as individuals, but through conversation, which requires us doing what we're doing today. There's people in here right now. I brought up the BRICS in class, my Introduction to African States class the other morning, because the BRICS Summit is this week. And I asked them, how many of you all know what BRICS is? Not a whole lot of hands went up, but if I can get one hand, then that's good. I'm saying, tell everybody else what BRICS is. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So what does that mean? It's an economic formation. It's a political formation. It's a formation of alliances to deal with everything from trade and lowering borders to trade to lending resources to each other. And I mean, I'm talking ideologically, because we know that there's a lot of problems. We start overlaying class and repression on these kind of things. But what we are saying, however, is that this is a formation that is designed in part to break the monopoly of the contemporary world system that comes out of Western Eurasia, Europe. So we have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. You've got this hammerlock in the UN where all the countries are, but you got a Security Council at the center. There has been to date no effective counterweight to a Western-centered global social structure. Whether it be the International Money Fund and the World Bank or the United Nations, they are all centered in the Western institutions, whether it be Brussels, whether it be the United States, or whether it be New York, whether it be Washington, D.C. You talking about the IMF, you talking about the World Bank, you coming to D.C. You talking about the UN, you're going to New York, you're going to Brussels or London to deal, or Geneva to start talking about the International Criminal Court. One of the reasons that Vladimir Putin wasn't at the meeting today and sent Sergei, the Secretary of State, is because they didn't put a warrant on him for arrest. And if he set foot in South Africa, they got to arrest him. The United States putting pressure. He's here, arrest him. No, yeah, I'm not coming. I'm going to send the other guy. Putin not a good guy. As John Clark said, in some stories, it's not no good guys. But what you're talking about now is geopolitics in the sense of realpolitik. Nation states fighting each other. State formations trying to create some autonomy. We have to be thinking about BRICS as a moment to consider the social structure we live in and how we can best use it to our advantage. What does that mean in a very concrete way? If you are buying your drawers 3 for $5 at Walmart, where my brother and sister who I saw earlier in the week are working overnight to restock the shelves, and they say make the store look like a new store. And I say, I don't like how to have overtime. No, they don't. We may get over 30 minutes now, but they bring in more help rather than pay overtime. It was fascinating we were talking about this. But at any rate, you have to ask yourself, is the price of cheap draws worth people working in sweatshops other places? Or the United States saying we're not going to subsidize or help in any country unless we have a strategic material interest there, strategic metals, or all this kind of thing. And then we're going to couch it in. We coming in to help y'all because of human rights abuses. That's a lie. You coming in to help us because corporations want to continue to extract resources. And so we have to think about BRICS. First thing we have to know is, what is BRICS? Not just what the countries are that are in it. What are their objectives? And you can get that on website. You can look at the BRICS website. You can read any sources. I'm just introducing a couple as terms of points of entry. And then how do it free us? Meaning what? How can we use it? This isn't the Bandung Conference of 55, where these countries came together and said, we're not with the Soviet Union and we're not with the United States. We are with ourselves. This was seen as a threat. When Martin King is having conversation, when Malcolm X is having conversation about these things, when Anna Hedgeman is traveling to Africa, as we talked about when we talked our deep dive on her, do you know Anna Arnold Hedgeman? This is a threat to a domestic state in terms of the United States that sees any notion of undermining American, by American, I mean American political and economic formation power around the world. Dr. King is a threat because he's coming out critiquing the United States foreign policy. As long as you're talking about domestic policy, that's all right. We can talk about jobs. We can talk about letting 3 more Negroes into Harvard. But what you're not going to do is talk about solidarity, global solidarity movements. And this is the challenge that even Anna Arnold Hedgeman raises in a minute. I'll come to her again. Put my timer on again. So I don't spend much time on this. But BRICS represents an opportunity for us to hear. And this is where punching through the noise becomes important. The conversation on building a different kind of world and strengthening different kind of relationships has never stopped in human memory. The contemporary movement, which really takes off after World War II, when Europe and the United States have punched each other in the face so much that these other non-white countries see points of departure from this structure that they might be able to create, which is why it's important for the Western countries to immediately come in with the IMF, the World Bank, the UN to try to shore up this international order. But that order now has reached probably the limits of its centrality. The BRICS represents, for good or for bad, a challenge, a sustainable challenge to the old Western arrangement, which arguably doesn't just go back to 1945 in terms of UN, World Bank, International Money Fund, but goes back to the criminal enterprise of settler colonialism. The last 500 years are reaching a point of inflection. And while it's cute for us to say, oh, look at Donald Trump's mugshot, which, by the way, come on, y'all. You know how much money Donald Trump gonna make off them t-shirts? He took that mugshot and he thinking in his mind, t-shirts, campaign posters. Meanwhile, we're like, yeah, laugh all you want, make it rain. But the point is this: while we are caught in a moment of conundrum and paradox at the idea of seeing the militarized city of Atlanta with all those black cops with their hands in their vests and sitting outside and saying, see, they finally got him. Fani Willis got him. Fani Willis is the police. Young Thug's still waiting to go to trial. 2 years of the charges, people flipping on each other. She charged 28 in Young Thug stuff, and they still can't even see the jury trying to go through jury selection. A couple of thousand people apparently have cycled through this jury selection process. I'm not critiquing Young Thug. I'm not critiquing Fani Willis. I'm asking the question that can we pause enough to understand that just because it's Donald Trump, let us not abandon the fact that the law, in fact, I think the lesson from the arrest of Donald Trump last week, one of the main lessons is that the law is a tool. The law is not the order of the universe. The law is not infallible. Hell, the law isn't often consistent. But what the law is a tool. And what you're seeing, there is a moment of schadenfreude when you see Donald Trump having to go into the same Fulton County jail that your mom and them had to go get somebody out of, behind the cotton curtain in Georgia. And there's a few probably Klan adjacent hillbillies who had strokes the other night, and we wish them a speedy recovery. In case of Rudy Giuliani, however, I'll quote Gus Scott Heron when he said of Frank Rizzo, we send him our coldest regards because we remember Patrick Dorismond. We remember Albert Lewima. So we hope, sir, that this black woman sets natural fire to you because it ain't got nothing to do with a stolen election or try to steal an election. This got to do with the fact that you've been raining terror on non-white people for decades since you stood up in Crown Heights with them police yelling at David Dinkins. So let's be very clear about this, Rudy Giuliani. We send you our coldest regards, Brother Giuliani, to riff on Cornel West. But anyway, which I know he got to be signifying when you call that cat brother. But the point is, when we understand that the global study enhances how we understand how our local struggles connect with the global struggle, we understand the value of studying the BRICS and what's going on. We should stay tuned with that because, of course, they're all going to meet at the United Nations. All the countries come in for the annual September meeting in New York. So we'll come back to this next month and talk about this some more. But I want to end with just a note on the March on Washington, and maybe end with something that we're not going to see today. Because 60 years later, in our communities, even including our communities, the quote unquote organizational communities, the civil rights community, so to speak, you see more women. Like I said, Kristen Clark came out of the Lawyers Conference of Civil Rights. She's now the Deputy Attorney General, reign and fire with consent decrees and coming into the communities, very important. And people say, well, you know, women didn't speak at the March on Washington. Well, that's not technically true. Like I said, Anna Hedgeman wrote a memo. In fact, she includes the memo. If I can find it quickly, I might not be able to find it quickly in here. She includes the memo in her, here it is, in the Trumpet Sounds, August 16th, 1963. She writes to A. Philip Randolph. There she is. A. Philip Randolph, Director, National March on Washington, from Anna Arnold Hedgeman, Member, Administrative Committee, March on Washington. Reason, proposed program, Lincoln Memorial. She says that a Negro woman make a brief statement. She said, in light of the role of Negro women in the struggle for freedom, and especially in light of the extra burden they have carried because of the castration of our Negro men in this culture, it is incredible that no woman should appear as a speaker at the historic March on Washington meeting at the Lincoln Memorial. Since the Big Six civil rights leaders have not given women the quality of participation which they have earned through the years, now, you know who was also included in that was Dorothy Height, National Council of Negro Women. More on her in a second. I would like to suggest the following: that a Negro woman make a brief statement and present the other heroines, just as you have suggested that the chairman might do. It has occurred to me that no woman or man could object to Mrs. Medgar Evers, Murray Evers that is, the widow of our freedom martyr, for this role. Her performance on television just after the murder of her husband proves her ability to make even one sentence, memorable. She mentioned perhaps Diane Nash coming in. Very important. But at any rate, and you go back into the narrative archive to see our long conversation on what led up to the 63 March and how Anna Hedgeman played a role in that, how she writes about this in The Gift of Chaos, how in 62, they were talking about a march. Randolph wants to do a march. By the spring of 63, she's telling them, you need to talk to Martin Luther King. You need, because they and the NAACP wasn't going to be in it. Roy Wilkins is like, we doing our own work. They stealing our thunder. Anna Hedgeman is like, no, you need to be at the table. There is a march to Washington in 1963, on Washington 63, that has everything to do directly with Anna Arnold Hedgeman making these men sit and talk with each other and figuring out how to pull the logistics. But let me not leave the sisters on this, because she suggests Murray Evers. Murray Evers gets caught up in traffic. She missed her speaking slot because they did put her on. Bayard Rustin was fighting her the whole way. No, we don't need this because, you know, Bayard Rustin is A. Philip Randolph's man. We start talking about gender in a governance formation. I'm not talking about social structure. I have no interest in any social structure commentary on the March on Washington and what it means before my interest in us having a conversation, because gender is a challenge, as Dr. Watkins says, Lethea Watkins says, quoting her colleague, the great Oyewumi Oyewumi. Gender, we call gender a social construct. That means it's constantly being renegotiated. Sitting at Audrey's funeral yesterday and seeing all those men on the podium, but then seeing the women come up one by one, and you see the balance and the energy shift, seeing the role of sisters, including Dr. Byrd in that, but seeing how much more we have to do to build community, but understanding that in that governance formation, this is a rock solid governance formation to which we retreat when we really had to get some work done, because these Negroes here are the ones that will fight you and then pray for your soul after they've killed you. But they gonna fight you first, not the Negroes pleading for admission. Is to understand that to talk about gender, even in terms of women not being included in the March on Washington speaker list, became a conversation about how women have been at the center of the organizational work. So yes, Myrlie Evers, they said, okay, all right, fine, all right, okay. Myrlie Evers, she got caught in traffic, couldn't get there. So who spoke for the second time that day? Daisy Bates from Arkansas. Daisy Bates was the speaker. She spoke there. It's very interesting to hear, because what Anna Arnold Hedgeman did, she got with two sisters who raised money for the civil rights movement, Corinne Smith and Jerry Stark from the Labor Council, American Negro Labor Council. And they was like, look, how are we going to put pressure on these people? So what you see, you hear Dr. King for a split second in all the little clips from the news, but what you probably haven't seen is Rosa Parks spoke very briefly at the March on Washington. She was introduced. It was downplayed, as Anna Arnold Hedgeman critiques in The Gift of Chaos, her book. Lena Horne spoke. One word. She got to the podium, got to the microphone, and said, freedom. Dropped the mic. They say, wait a minute, what was that? Josephine Baker. Because now you got gaps. You'll see them again today, where it's something, people not doing anything, or they got transitioning. They give the mic to Josephine Baker, and for 2 minutes, this daughter of East St. Louis, leaving the United States in the wake of race violence and massacres, becomes a huge star overseas in Western Eurasia, in Europe, a global star. She comes back in military dress. They gave her the high honors in the French military for being part of the resistance, perhaps even a spy, as recent scholarship says. But she spoke for almost 2 minutes. She gave the longest speech by a woman that day at the March on Washington. And she talked about coming back to the United States, and thanks for welcoming me back to have this conversation. Never thought I'd see today. Gloria Richardson, the great Gloria Richardson, who made transition shortly, a little while ago. Gloria Richardson, the young sister, the hero of Cambridge, Massachusetts, the intellectual, the warrior. They don't know what she gonna say. Gloria Richardson gets to the podium. Gloria Richardson says, hello. And somebody cuts the mic. You can't let this young buck talk. This ain't John Lewis, who didn't write his speech. The famous moment of confrontation when John Lewis is getting ready to use the speech from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to set fire to the whole thing a little bit, singe it a little bit, and A. Philip Randolph entreats him, pleads to him, no, I've waited my whole life for this, don't do it. And him and Julian Bond rewriting parts of the speech. Now, they wasn't going to set fire to the thing, but they're going to be a little bit heavier than what Randolph, Rustin, and them want, because they worried about their white allies. This is the conundrum when the social structure and the government structure overlap. But he still gave a speech that Anna Arnold Hedgeman writes. In fact, let's let Ms. Hedgeman speak for herself, if I can find it quickly, on the March on Washington. So I named some of the sisters who were at the march. She says, and it might be at the end of this chapter, because she talks about Martin Luther King. Let me see. No. It's not in the trumpet sounds. This was 64, right after. I think it's in The Gift of Chaos, where she wrote, yes, this is a good place for us to bring it in for a landing. Yes. She says that the challenge she remembers came to me in terms of the speeches of the day. She says, from John Lewis, young representative of students, white and Negro, who were even then marching, suffering in and out of jails, and challenging adults who had taken them for granted for too long. John has said to us, he's what he said, quote, we march today for jobs and freedom. Hundreds of thousands of our brothers are not here, for they are receiving starvation wages or no wages at all. These people who weren't at Martha's Vineyard, talking about affirmative action. Sharecroppers in the Delta of Mississippi are in the fields today working for less than $3 a day, 12 hours a day. The danger of silence and the reality of economic and social problems cried out for change. Could we achieve those changes? This is what she's saying. This is what Anna Arnold Hedgeman said. I came away from the March on Washington, what John Lewis was talking about in terms of social class. That was the thing that resonated with me. And of course, Gloria Richardson, who only got to say hello, Lena Horne, who only got to say freedom, while they waiting on Martin Luther King, they are hustled up away from the March on Washington and put in taxis and told to leave because they are seen as being disruptive. Wow. I hope nobody asked nobody to leave for the day. So let me wind up and end with this. The day after the March on Washington, Dorothy Height calls a meeting. Because after the march, they go to the White House. But Dorothy Height is like, where the hell y'all going? Are the men going? No problem. That's the show stuff. That's the social structure stuff. It's not that it's unimportant, because we're going to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 after that, and a bloody Freedom Summer of 64, preceded by a bloody the death of Medgar Evers in the summer of 63. Then after I Have a Dream, they blow up those blow up 4 little girls and shoot 2 black boys in Birmingham. So we see, of course, Kennedy's killed in November 63. The thing is rolling over. You come up into 64, and the Civil Rights Act of 64 after Freedom Summer is passed after Johnson, of course, is president. But Dorothy Height said, okay, y'all going to the White House, whatever. Tomorrow, I want the sisters to get together. And she calls a meeting where black women come together to say, okay, after the march, now what? At that meeting, in Anna Arnold Hedgeman's papers, is the speech, part of the speech in a letter form that Paulie Murray gives. Paulie Murray is at that meeting that the sisters have the day after the March on Washington. So while we're talking about the 28th, which is Monday, it might be nice on Tuesday to talk about the women planning what comes next. Because if we go back to 41, when Phil Randolph and Arnold Hedgeman and them threatened to march on Washington in 41, and in response, Roosevelt signs Executive Order 8802, desegregating the military, a huge leap, and establishes the Fair Employment Practices Commission that Anna Arnold Hedgeman is in leadership of afterwards. It's important to remember that when Randolph calls off the march in response to what Roosevelt did, the black women, like Mary Bethune, is like, ho, chief, hold on. You calling off the march? You know what? No problem. Go ahead. They have a 2-day conference at Howard University at Rankin Chapel. What do we do next? These black women are no joke. And in our governance formation, we owe it to ourselves to study ourselves and our communities. And sometimes it's going to take a quote unquote gendered lens, but it can't be one that the social structure is jumping in trying to say us too. Yeah, because Bella Abzug, and then there's Gloria Steinem. Oh, yeah. In a minute. What you doing? We're talking to ourselves. Can I come? No, you can't come. Because if you come, you're going to want to talk. And if you talk, somebody in here going to get confused. We need to have our own conversation. Anna Arnold Hedgeman needed to set fire to her comrade, A. Philip Randolph, needed to put Martin Luther King in check around these sisters. And as she did it, what you see emerge 60 years later is the potential, if we remember, to not just continue from 63, but to learn the lessons that have happened between 63 to now, so that we can begin to continue to enhance our struggle, which isn't a struggle ultimately for freedom or liberation, but a struggle to be human in the world without restraint. That's a different set of circumstances. It doesn't lead you to Harvard. It leads you here to each other. Ashe.
Well, I just bought the book, The Gift of Chaos.
You found it? Yes.
No, I didn't find it as used because it's out of print, so I had to pay $60 for it. Which so you got yours when it probably didn't cost much.
Yeah. Well, people have been finding it, but that's for the people not on the internet. But now, you know what? I know you will look into it. I think The Gift of Chaos is Oxford University.
Out of print. It's out of print, though, right?
Well, yes, but
and can it be back in print? Yes, I think it can. So we're gonna say less. We're gonna say less. That
say less. We're gonna
say that. Yes, we're gonna have that. We're gonna have that in our library at some point.
No question.
Also, you said ad infinitum, which is Latin, and I was wondering what would the Egyptians say? Because you said today it was gonna be, I have a dream. And I was like, you're speaking Latin, we're speaking in English. Can we start to pepper? Can we start to pepper the ancient into our dialogue and our conversations with each other? But we first have to have the words like Ankh Ujab Seneb,
right?
Which now I utter every day on my show.
That's beautiful. People knowing that, right? This is ancient Egyptian. Well, Egyptians have a number of words for forever and eternity, but not maybe perpetual. Let me see. In that sense, I'm thinking of Nehehe or Jet, both of which can be translated as forever. There's Maquette, which, see, that's interesting because the language shows the cultural distinction. Like we were talking last week about Heheru, and you said home instead of house and connected. That just brought it all the way through. Ad infinitum, meaning, infinitely, as it's going to be repeated over and over again, ad infinitum. If we say Maquette, the word Maquette, the literal translation is after, AFTER, but the time signature can be used, and Dr. Obenga used to talk about this all the time, which is why I've been fascinated with that term ever since. It can be used to talk about preceding you in time and space, what's going on at this moment in time and space, or what follows you in time and space. He used to get a metaphor. He'd be like, if the two of us are coming into a building and you open the door and say, after you, that means you coming behind me. Or if you say, I'm going to go in front of you, you're gonna come after me. Or we go through the same time. The time signature, maquette, it's almost like in Ebonics, the verb be. So instead of saying they repeat Martin Luther King's speech ad infinitum, we could say Martin Luther King spoke to maquette, meaning what? He spoke that day in 63. He brought forward the ancestors, meaning he dipped into the past, and today he's still speaking. So instead of ad infinitum, it's like he spoke to maquette. But that would change the cultural meaning, because ad infinitum almost makes it sound like we got it, we got it, we got it. Whereas maquette is like, we need to listen again. We want to hear it again. Ad infinitum almost has a critical thing. But, or we could say it in Ebonics, that Martin Luther King, man, Dr. King be giving that I Have a Dream speech. When what? He gave it in the moment, and he's giving it today. He be giving that speech. Dr. King is dead now, but that speech, he be giving that speech. Meaning what? The be form, that infinitive, is past, present, and future, which is why you need Ebonics for certain things you can't say in English.
Facts.
Yeah,
all of that.
Yeah.
This was very I was just in community with Ahmad to see how we're gonna, because that woman piece
Critical.
And when you brought up Bayard Rustin, it's you think about people who are oppressed in one area who will oppress people. And that's the problem with oppression. It oppresses you to oppress other people, because there's always this get back that's inherent, right? Like,
right.
Which is what the fear is. We can't give Black people power because they're going to enslave us. I get it, but we got a lot of work to do.
That's right. Well, let me just mention one other thing very quickly. If you all find yourselves in New York and Brooklyn, I know folks been going to that Hove exhibit or whatever. If you can sneak into the bookstore, and you can get them online as well, but if you can sneak into the bookstore at the Brooklyn Museum, you can pick up a copy of this book, Making the Movement: How Activists Fought for Civil Rights with Buttons, Flyers, Pens, and Posters. I mention it because it's got great visuals. Those of you who are teachers, want young people, particularly to grab. There's a picture on page 105 of one of the posters, All Citizens of Cleveland, March for Freedom, Sunday, July 14th, 1963, right, March to Cleveland Stadium. There were a lot of marches that supported the March on Washington. And what this, here's one for the March on Washington, Wednesday, August 28, 63. You see some of the names: March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Of course, the buttons from the March on Washington are there. And then the campaign for a strong civil rights bill by Christmas. Again, it wasn't just the march, it was the policy they wanted. Then later on, you got boycotts, freedom stay out, better schools. This is coming in the wake of that. Here's the souvenir program from March the 5th, 1964. Souvenir program, March on Frankfort, Kentucky. Meaning what? The March on Washington was very important to understand that you have to put it in the larger context. Illinois rally for civil rights, and so forth and so on. But if you get this book, you can trace through the kind of cultural meaning making in terms of posters and buttons and flyers that give you a way to mark how we, communicating with we, created this momentum of rituals. So marches aren't just about the march itself, it's about connecting communities and organizing. I just wanted to mention that, and also tell people this is a good book to have.
Yes. And the power of like knowing, so that you don't think we just started here. Like,
right.
Even bringing up the 1940s march, to even know that, like, this is not just something that just happened, and it keeps happening. And we gotta be reminded. And also, we can't challenge the folk that they put, the pick-me Negroes that they put in front of us,
right,
unless we have the ability to do that. So I guess we'll end with this sister getting up at this.
Oh yeah, let's watch that.
Because you told us about it. Oh, I don't want to do that. Let me.
It's all right. There you go. That was the panel.
How do I break it? There we go. Okay, let me. Here we go.
Some time issues here,
yeah,
so let's get your questions and make them brief, and your answers will be brief, and I will be brief.
Okay. I will be very brief. My name is Nadia Simone. I wrote my question so I can remember it, and I've learned a lot from you all. Thank you for this space. How can we resurrect Black educational standards and practices that fell by the wayside after integration was implemented? It seems once the focus was to get into white spaces, our communities abandoned our own standards and practices we had. And Jay, I would love for you to answer, as well as everybody on the panel. Thank you.
You get the question?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's how do you preserve Black educational standards that were in place before desegregation, integration. Is that right?
Resurrect.
Yeah, I mean, that debate is happening. I live in the East Bay in California, and that debate is happening quite a bit in terms of small school closures and school closures in Oakland. And the question is whether community schools that service a small number of mostly Black students, those are being closed, and that pushes to try and create big integrated middle schools and elementary schools. And I think that, that debate, at first you come down and you say, well, there should be big integrated schools. If you're, I don't know, a person on the left like myself, it's just sort of your default. It actually makes you quite boring sometimes, but you think that. But yeah, I talked to a lot of the teachers. Some of the teachers went on hunger strike, and I think that they were sort of asking the same question that you were, right? Which was that within a community that knows these students, right, that understands what they've been going through, is there a way that you can have a school that is dedicated to them? And then why, when it comes to what schools have to close, like why are those always the first schools that are chosen, right? And that is what happened in Oakland. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's not something that I think I have a clear answer to, but I think that it's something that is, being discussed quite fervently around the country, especially in the East Bay right now.
Anybody have a different response?
Anybody?
Okay.
Anybody?
Next question.
Anybody? Hold on.
Anybody have anybody?
No.
And sister's like, what the hell we talking about? And he's the only one who answered was a non-African.
Well, she asked him, and I know that it's because affirmative action was dismantled through the lens of Asian, oppression, I guess.
Well, that's what Bloom tried to do with a handful of folk. And Kang made that point earlier in the critique. He said it isn't that there aren't people who think that way, but it wasn't. But you're absolutely right. But you saw that, right? She's sitting there, and she put it right there. They can't answer that question. They've spent their lives trying to get in their master's institute.
So what's the point of this panel? I'm like, why even convene people that aren't willing or able to answer the questions that will actually bring us forward?
Well, I mean, the panel was sponsored by some millionaires who need the Black studies at their university. So you know the purpose. You gotta feel good about themselves. I mean, because Massey right before her had said, look, and the thing I like about Massey, forget his politics, is that he was at Cal Berkeley. So one of these institutions y'all love so much, I was the provost there. That's the chief academic officer. And I was the president of an HBCU, Morehouse. And I was on the board of the community colleges of Chicago. You can't get around me. So they ignored him like they ignored her. He spoke just before she did. In other words, the things that should let everybody know what is the role of the Negro intellectual in the white space. When confronted with the we, even if they know they want to say something, you're not about to mess up my money, which is the point.
Yeah, and as soon as you start talking about the left and the right, that's when I check out, because this is not a left and right conversation.
Nope.
This is a question about humanity.
No
Thank you for that. And everything, and all of the books that I now have to buy.
No.
And,
we're gonna bring into narrative though. Some of these things ain't got we're gonna do that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the markers, Also tomorrow, of course, we have Maroon's Medicine Chest with Dr. Sunyata. We got yoga and mental health with Dr. Narissa. And then, of course, on Monday, office hours with you.
With me,
Dr. Carr, and on and on we go.
On and on. Happy new school year, Dr. Hunter and Professor Hunter and everybody else. Love y'all.
Yeah, love you too.
So I'll see y'all soon.
Okay. All right. Bye, y'all.